All right, guys. Tonight, we're settling into a world where the air bites with a sharpness that your heated bedroom could never possibly replicate. Snow stretches out, endless and white, and you're stepping into a Native American winter camp just as dawn breaks, where every breath you take leaves a small cloud that drifts like a ghost above the frosted ground. The people here don't have electric blankets, no radiators humming away in the corner, and definitely no thermostats to flick at a moment's notice. It's just them, this land, and whatever ingenuity centuries of survival have carved deep into their traditions. You'd probably not make it through a single night if you were suddenly dropped here in your pajamas, so let's take comfort in knowing we're only visiting through our imagination. So before you get too comfortable, take a quick moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. While you're at it, post your location and your local time down in the comments below. I really love seeing where in the world all of you are watching from. Now, dim the lights and let's step a little closer. You're trudging through freshly fallen snow that makes a squeaking sound beneath your moccasins. It's that kind of dry, crystalline flake that only gathers when the temperature has plunged well below freezing. The sky overhead is tinged with a soft lavender, the promise of a reluctant sun that's still hidden somewhere below the horizon. Around you, the faint silhouettes of dwellings are starting to take shape. Some are the round, mounded earth lodges with smoke feathering gently from their tops. Others are the sharp, triangular teepees that rise like sentinels against the pale morning glow. Your eyelashes begin to frost over, and every single exhale makes you acutely aware of just how thin the veil is between your body's heat and the cold that desperately wants to claim it. The camp is humming with a kind of muted life. Children, their noses bright red, are peeking out from underneath blankets of soft rabbit fur. A dog shakes itself free of snow right beside a fire pit, sending a spray of tiny white crystals flying into the air. You catch the faint smell of wood smoke mixed with the scent of animal hides, an aroma that is both a comfort and a necessity in this place. The knowledge that without this smoke, this warmth, these very furs, the people here could not endure even a single night settles deep into your mind. A mainstream fact comes to mind, reminding you that many tribes of the plains and the northern woodlands shifted their dwellings with the seasons. In the summertime, lightweight structures were perfect for the heat and the mobility needed for hunting. But in the winter, sturdier, heat-retaining lodges became absolutely essential, sometimes dug partially into the earth to harness the natural insulation of the soil. This wasn't some careless choice on their part. It was a calculated dance with the climate itself. They understood the Earth's warmth far better than most modern engineers understand insulation ratings. You step closer to one of the lodges, its entrance small, almost mean-looking, forcing you to crouch low as you imagine what it would be like to crawl inside. But that tiny entry is precisely what keeps out the icy drafts. Inside, the air would hit you with a blast of smoky heat, a sudden, sharp contrast that makes your chilled skin sting for a moment before it soothes. And yet, historians still argue about whether the smoke that filled these lodges was more of a help or a hazard. Some claim the constant inhalation caused long-term damage to people's lungs, while others insist that it toughened their bodies against the brutal winter colds. You picture the interior, smoke swirling around, sparks glowing in the dark. The air heavy but so much warmer, life-saving in every possible sense of the word. Quirky little details start to emerge too. Some accounts describe people plugging gaps in the walls with moss or even with frozen mud. It's an odd trick that actually worked much better than it sounds. Snow, after all, can be an insulator if you know just how to use it. Imagine pressing handfuls of that icy powder against a wall, and instead of it melting, it becomes a part of the structure, sealing out the bitter winds. You would never think of snow as a friend in a survival situation, yet here, it is quietly lending its help. The frost makes you look up for a moment. A crow is flying overhead, its black wings slicing through the pastel dawn. Its call is harsh, but to the people here it's a familiar companion. Life in the winter is not silent, even if the snow muffles most footsteps and voices. There is always the sound of crackling firewood, the soft breath of animals, the whistle of wind around the huts, and the occasional cry of a bird scouting for scraps. These noises root you in the present moment, reminding you that despite all the hardships, this camp is very much alive. As you walk further into the camp, you catch sight of hunters returning from an early check of their traps. They aren't carrying anything just yet, but their faces are calm. They know that survival here isn't measured in hours, but in a kind of patience stretched out across entire months. The fur-lined hoods around their heads are rimmed with frost, their movements slow, but incredibly deliberate. You can imagine the sensation of pulling a hood like that tighter, the sharp scent of animal hide so close to your nose, the rough texture brushing against your skin. For a moment, you wonder, could you truly sleep in a place like this, where every breath feels like a borrowed gift from the fire? The answer to that lies in adaptation. You would curl up against your family, wrapped in layers of furs, your body heat mingling with theirs, and you'd come to accept that survival isn't just about personal strength, but about a collective warmth. This truth hums just beneath every single gesture here in the camp. The sun finally crests the horizon, weak and pale, throwing a golden light across the snow. Its light glints off the ice that's coating the tree branches, turning the edge of the forest into a cathedral of glittering spires. You shiver, both from the imagined cold and from the sheer awe of such a sight. In this stillness, the camp's resilience seems to glow even brighter than the sunrise. Without modern warmth, these people shape their entire lives around the question of how to sleep, how to dream, and how to wake up again with enough strength to continue. You take one last look at this frosty dawn arrival. The camp is stirring now. Fires are crackling louder. Voices are rising, and yet the mystery of the night's survival still lingers in the air. Tonight, you will follow them deeper into their shelters, closer to the very heart of their winter endurance, to see how rest was carved from a world that offered very little mercy. You press onward, following a snow-packed trail that winds between the clustered lodges, the ground beneath your feet crunching like brittle glass. Each step seems to echo in the stillness, magnified by the frozen quiet that has settled over the camp. There is no background hum of engines here, no distant highway to mask the sound, only the rhythmic creak of snow compressing under your own weight. You notice just how narrow these paths are, barely wider than a single person, because energy here cannot be wasted on any unnecessary clearing. Every single shoveled line has a purpose. Each one is a lifeline to warmth, to food, or to firewood. The sharp air tastes almost metallic on your tongue. Your nostrils sting, the little hairs inside freezing with every single inhalation. You tug your cloak tighter, and in doing so, you can feel the faint heat that's trapped beneath the layers of hide. You imagine children hopping along behind their parents, leaving smaller tracks that quickly fill up with powdery drifts of snow. Dogs pad confidently ahead of you, their paws completely accustomed to the icy bite, their fur frosted yet ever resilient. To your right, you can see where the snowbanks rise up taller than your shoulders, walls sculpted by both human hands and the relentless wind. These barriers are not just obstacles. They are allies, redirecting powerful gusts away from the fragile shelters. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind here. Many winter camps were deliberately positioned near groves of trees or natural embankments where the wind could be softened and the snow could be used as a shield. Location was absolutely everything. To choose poorly meant exposure, but to choose wisely meant survival. Tribes carried with them centuries of knowledge about where the land offered its most subtle protections. But let's pause for a moment on a curious detail. Some reports suggest that certain groups sprinkled ashes across the paths to prevent them from icing over. It's a trick you might associate more with modern city streets than with ancient camps. It provided traction in a world where just one slip could mean a broken bone, and that could mean disaster. You picture the odd contrast. The fine gray ash against the pristine white snow, a reminder that ingenuity often rests in the simplest of gestures. Historians still argue about whether these trails were more like communal arteries or guarded passageways. Did every person move freely across this snowy web? Or were some paths reserved for hunters, for elders, or for ritual purposes? The evidence is mixed, leaving you to imagine how the rules of etiquette must have mingled with the stark necessity of survival. Either way, each step you take is on ground that is deeply trodden with meaning. Your senses heighten as you begin to notice the subtle signs of life that are pressed into the snow. Rabbit tracks hop in delicate arcs, vanishing underneath a mound of snow. A faint trail of deer scatters off into the trees, luring hunters outward. Even the human prints differ from the broad strides of an adult to the smaller steps of a child and the heavy drag of a laden sled. If you were to bend down and touch the tracks, the snow would be crusted, sharp enough to scratch your skin. Yet beneath that crust lies a softer powder, muffled and forgiving. The sounds here are delicate but persistent, carried on the cold air. Far off, you catch the hollow thunk of someone splitting wood, each strike echoing like a steady heartbeat. Closer, the flap of a lodge cover rustles, releasing a puff of smoke and a child's sudden laughter. And then, silence returns, thick and blanketing, as if the snow just swallows everything that it touches. Imagine lying down in such a profound quiet, the stillness heavy enough to lull your mind straight into sleep, though the cold would surely rouse you before any dreams could arrive. As you move along the packed trail, you realize that every pathway here is layered with stories. Generations have walked these exact same patterns, the snow repacked again and again until it has hardened almost like stone. In your mind, you can almost feel the rhythm of footsteps at dusk, hunters trudging their way home, women carrying bundles of gathered wood, elders moving carefully but steadily, all of them converging along these arteries of survival. What strikes you most is how the trails are not merely practical, but also deeply communal. They connect each family shelter, weaving them all together into something more than just a collection of isolated lodges. They remind you that survival is rarely a solitary thing here, and even sleep, the most vulnerable state of all, depends entirely on collective work. Clearing paths, tending fires, hauling furs, preparing food. The trail that is under your feet right now is proof of that interdependence, pressed into the snow by countless souls. Your own breath quickens with the effort of walking through the cold. The cold bites at your fingers, and you tuck them deeper into your mittens, grateful for the imagined insulation. You reflect on how every single sensory detail, the sting in your lungs, the crunch of the packed snow, the faint glow of firelight flickering between the lodges, would have been a part of daily life for those who truly lived this. To them, it wasn't exotic or harsh. It was simply winter, something to be endured with grit and a quiet, practiced skill. At the end of the path, you glimpse a larger space, a central clearing where all the trails meet like spokes on a wheel. Fires flicker here, guarded and carefully fed, and you sense that this is where the pulse of the camp beats the strongest. The snow-packed trails have carried you directly into the heart of communal endurance. Here, warmth will gather, and stories will rise up to remind weary bodies why it is worth surviving another frozen night. You leave the central clearing behind you and step into one of the winter lodges, drawn in by the rich scent of hides and the warm glow of firelight. Inside, the dim space feels like it's worlds apart from the glittering snowfields you have just trudged through. The air is smoky and heavy, but compared to the frost outside, it is thick with an undeniable comfort. You blink as your eyes adjust to the dimness, and soon you begin to notice the walls that are rising around you. They're not made of smooth wood or stone, but a patchwork of animal hides layered one over the other, like a protective skin. Each fur seems to carry its own story. The broad sweep of a buffalo hide, thick and shaggy, the softer glint of deer pelts, the mottled texture of beaver fur. Together, they create a barrier that is both practical and deeply symbolic. It's the line between a freezing death and enduring warmth. The sensation of brushing your hand against one of these hides is truly unforgettable. They feel rough in some places, supple in others, worn smooth from years and years of use. They smell faintly musky, with the earthy aroma of animals, smoke, and human touch all mingling together. To you, raised in a world of factory-made fabrics, it might feel strange, almost primitive even. But to the people here, these hides are refined tools, perfected by generations of tanning, softening, and stitching. They are not crude improvisations, but carefully crafted armor against the biting cold. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. Among the Plains tribes, buffalo hides were often the most prized for winter coverings. A single large hide could span across a lodge wall or drape over several sleepers, and when it was doubled up, it became nearly impervious to the cutting wind. Hunters knew to harvest the animals in the late fall when their coats were at their thickest, ensuring that the winter supply of warmth was properly secured. Without that kind of foresight, the nights could easily turn deadly. And then comes a quirky little tidbit. Did you know that some hides were deliberately decorated, even though their main purpose was just insulation? Painted images, symbols, or dyes were added to certain skins, turning these practical walls into living canvases. Imagine dozing off at night, half buried under a pile of pelts, while faint figures of animals or geometric designs watched over you from the walls. Warmth and art were not separate things here. They were stitched together. Historians still debate just how much individuality was expressed in these painted hides. Were the designs purely spiritual and communal, or did families add their own personal touches as a form of identity, much like you might decorate your bedroom today? Some scholars argue that these symbols were almost like signatures, while others think they remained largely standardized across the community. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, but either way, the hides carried more than just warmth. They carried meaning. You settle lower inside the lodge near the edge of a sleeping space. Here, the bedding is layered thick, with mats of reeds or woven grass underneath, hides stretched across them and furs piled high on top. When you sink down, your body weight compresses the layers, releasing a faint crackle of dried reeds and a soft sigh of fur shifting into place. You can just imagine the relief of lying here after hours of walking along frozen trails, your muscles loosening, your back slowly warming against the compressed hides. The soundscape inside is incredibly intimate. The fire pops gently in the hearth at the center. Sparks flare upward toward the smoke hole in the roof. Soft voices murmur nearby, parents soothing their children or elders humming low, quiet songs. Somewhere, a dog shifts and exhales, its body curled up against the side of the lodge wall. All of this is happening in a haze of warmth that seems absolutely miraculous compared to the icy air that's just outside. In this half-light, you can almost feel yourself drifting off. The furs rise up around you like a cocoon, shutting out the frozen wind completely. Each hide adds another layer of protection, not only against the weather but also against fear. It's the knowledge that these layers mean survival, that you are wrapped in the strength of the buffalo, the deer, the beaver. The hides don't just keep you alive. They remind you that you are part of a chain of lives, all connected through the hunt, through craft, and through community. Your thoughts wander to how different this is from slipping beneath your own blankets at home. You have synthetic fibers, electric heat, and total climate control. Yet here, despite the lack of such luxuries, the experience of seeking warmth is universal. Your body recognizes the comfort. Your heart rate slows. Your breath begins to steady. It is the very same act, a human being curling into safety for the night. Someone across the lodge stirs, shifting a pile of furs over their shoulders. The rustle is soft, like waves of fabric. You notice how communal the arrangement is, too. Families do not each have their own separate beds, but instead share broad sleeping platforms, lying close together beneath the layers of hides. It is a warmth built not just from material, but from togetherness itself. As your eyes grow heavy and the fire's glow, you realize just how profound these layered hides are. They are walls, blankets, symbols, and memories all at once. Without them, no one in this camp could possibly face the endless nights of a long winter. With them, people sleep, they dream, and they awaken again to another day of survival. And so the hides and furs breathe their quiet promise of protection through the cold, endurance through the dark, and the soft, steady assurance that even in the harshest of winters, warmth can always be found. You crawl back out into the crisp night air, the smell of smoke and hides clinging to your clothing. The snow stings your cheeks again, reminding you of just how thin the line is between comfort and real danger. As you walk further into the camp, you notice another kind of dwelling rising up from the frozen earth. Unlike the teepees, which taper sharply toward the sky, these structures seem to hunker down into the land itself, their rounded shapes partially swallowed by the surrounding soil. You pause for a moment to study them. These are earth lodges, and they hold a very special secret. It's a warmth gathered from beneath the very ground you're standing on. Stepping closer, you see how their walls are built with a skeleton of timber poles angled inward like a giant rib cage, then layered thick with grasses, reeds, and finally covered with packed earth. Snow lies on their roofs like a layer of icing, but instead of threatening collapse, it insulates them even further, sealing in precious heat. The entrance is low and narrow, forcing you to bend, almost to crawl, to get inside. It's another clever way to keep drafts from stealing all the warmth. Inside, the difference is striking. The air is warmer, the ground feels more stable. You realize the floor dips slightly below the level of the surrounding land. By digging down like this, the builders made use of the Earth's own steady temperature, a natural buffer against the brutal swings of winter weather. It feels quieter in here, too, as if the Earth itself is muffling the howls of the wind outside. A mainstream historical fact grounds this image for you. Earth lodges were common among tribes of the plains and the Missouri River Valley, like the Mandan and the Hidatsa. These communities often built entire villages of dozens, sometimes even hundreds of such lodges clustered close together. Each one could house several families, sometimes 20 or more people, all gathered together under one earthy roof. In the winter, this concentration of bodies, fires, and thick insulation created pockets of surprising warmth. And here's a quirky little detail. Some earth lodges had roofs that were sturdy enough to walk on. Children would clamber up the slopes, playing games, even in the deep snow, their laughter echoing across the frozen village. Imagine sitting inside, drifting towards sleep, while the faint thuds of running feet reverberated above you like muffled drums. It was a constant reminder that life, even in the harshest winter, carried joy right alongside survival. Historians still debate whether these lodges were primarily practical or if they were also ceremonial. Some argue that their construction mirrored cosmic symbolism, with the circular form reflecting the universe and the central fire embodying the sun. Others suggest that while symbolism was certainly present, the pressing reality of the cold is what dictated their form. The debate leaves you picturing families curled up around their hearths, perhaps not thinking of cosmic models at all, but simply of making it through another night. You sit at the edge of one of the sleeping platforms, which is built of packed earth and topped with mats and furs. Around the central fire, people are gathering, though not all of them are lying down yet. A few are talking quietly, tending to their tools or sipping broth from carved wooden bowls. The flames dance upward, their smoke funneled through a vent at the roof's peak, though much of it still lingers, making the air hazy. The fire's glow flickers across the lodge's walls, turning the earthen curves into a kind of womb, dark, protective, and strangely comforting. The sensation here is heavier than it was in the teepee. You feel wrapped not just in hides, but in the earth itself. The walls are cool to the touch, yet they radiate a kind of steadiness, as though the land itself is cradling you. Your body relaxes in ways you didn't expect. Outside, storms may rage, but inside the Earth Lodge, there is the calm hush of endurance. A child nearby stirs, adjusting a rabbit fur blanket over themselves. A woman strokes the child's hair, humming softly. The song is low, almost indistinguishable from the crackle of the firewood, but it weaves the moment together. Your eyelids flutter at the rhythm of it, lulled by the mixture of voice and flame. You can easily imagine falling asleep here, with smoke curling upward, heat seeping outward from the fire, and the steady weight of the soil pressing gently from all sides. If you listen closely, you can hear water dripping faintly where melting snow has seeped through and is freezing again, creating tiny, sparkling crystals along the inner walls. The lodge breathes with the environment, absorbing and releasing moisture in a cycle as old as the earth itself. This is not a fragile shelter, but a living system, resilient and incredibly responsive. The thought crosses your mind. What would it feel like to wake up inside one of these lodges at dawn? You would open your eyes to a dim light filtering down through the smoke hole. You'd stretch your stiff muscles against the reeds and feel the warmth of your family pressed nearby. The fire would be just embers now, glowing red, waiting for new wood to be added. And you would rise, brush the sleep from your eyes, and step out into the cold with a renewed sense that the earth itself had lent you its strength to survive. So as you lie in this imagined space, half buried in earth and fur, remember this. These lodges were more than just homes. They were lessons that were carved in soil, reminders that the land is not an enemy to be fought, but an ally to be embraced. In the heart of winter, they were sanctuaries of warmth. And in their silence, they whispered that survival could be found in the very ground that was right beneath your feet. You pause at the threshold of another lodge, where the beating heart of winter life pulses at its strongest. Step inside, and your senses are immediately engulfed by the glow and the crackle of a fire rising from the central hearth. The flames lick upward, casting orange ripples of light across the faces that are circled around it, their eyes reflecting both fatigue and a deep reassurance. This hearth is not merely a convenience. It is survival itself. Without it, the cold would creep into every single pore and freeze the very marrow in your bones. Here, though, the fire is a living presence, as vital as breath itself. The warmth strikes your skin immediately, chasing away the sting of the frost that you've been carrying since you stepped outdoors. You feel your shoulders begin to unclench, your breath deepen, and a faint sweat bead along your brow, despite the frigid world that exists just outside the lodge. Families huddle near, some stretched out under layers of furs, others sitting cross-legged, their hands extended to catch the waves of heat. The fire is never allowed to die out completely. Embers glow even through the darkest hours, tended to carefully because to lose the fire in winter is to court death. It's well documented that across countless indigenous groups, the hearth served not just as a heat source, but also as the very axis of domestic life. Cooking, tool making, conversation, and ceremony often revolved around it. To sleep beside the hearth was to rest within the camp's very core. You imagine yourself curling up close, lulled by the rhythmic pop of sap inside the burning wood, the faint aroma of roasting meat blending with the smoke, and the hush of whispers trailing off into silence. And yet, you might be surprised to learn that the fires indoors were not always roaring blazes. Too much flame meant too much smoke, and too much smoke meant burning eyes and choking lungs. Instead, fires were kept small and steady, coaxed like living pets rather than unleashed like wild beasts. A glowing bed of coals often provided more enduring comfort than high, leaping flames. You picture people adjusting the logs with sticks, nurturing the embers as though they were feeding them crumbs. Some evidence suggests that there were disagreements, even within households, about how to manage the smoke. Should the vent be left open wider, letting precious warmth escape, or should it be kept narrow, filling the lodge with haze but preserving the heat? Anthropologists continue to puzzle over whether each family had standard practices or if they improvised nightly based on the conditions. Imagine lying under the firs, your eyes watering from the smoke, yet being reluctant to move, because stepping away from the fire's circle meant facing those icy drafts. It was a delicate balance, to endure a little bit of choking in order to preserve a lot of warmth. As you settle deeper into the imagined lodge, the fire seems almost hypnotic. The flames twist and curl. Shadows flicker across the walls, and the shapes remind you of animals, trees, or even spirits. Children stare with wide eyes, their dreams merging with the constant dance of light. Adults murmur softly, telling stories that rise and fall in rhythm with the leaping sparks. This is where culture grows just as much as warmth, where knowledge and memory are carried in the tales that are passed along beside the fire. You also notice the soundscape, the soft hiss as sap bursts from the wood, the occasional crack that sends sparks shooting upward, and the shuffling of feet as someone shifts a little closer. Against this backdrop, the voices are steady and low, like the heartbeat of a community. You lie down near the edge, where the heat is gentle rather than scorching, and you pull a hide up to your chin. The texture of the fur is coarse at first, but it softens as it begins to warm up. Oddly enough, not every fuel was wood. Some accounts mention that dried buffalo dung was used when timber was scarce, particularly out on the plains. Imagine the peculiar smell, earthy and sharp, filling the entire lodge. To modern noses, it might seem unpleasant. Yet to those who lived here, it was the fragrance of survival. You might wrinkle your nose at first, but soon you would come to accept it, and maybe even begin to associate it with a feeling of security. The fire does more than just warm bodies. It guards against the intangible. Many indigenous traditions spoke of fire as a sacred presence, a boundary against the harmful spirits that were believed to prowl during the long night. When the flames crackled, people believed they were not alone, but were accompanied by forces that protected them. The hearth was at once practical and mystical, a bridge between the body and the spirit. Your eyes follow the smoke as it curls upward toward the vent in the roof. Sometimes it escapes in smooth, clean streams. Other times it drifts back down, weaving a gray veil throughout the room. The air feels thick. Your throat is dry, but your body loosens under the steady heat. You realize how sleep here is not accidental, but something that has been orchestrated by centuries of practice. The fire is tended in shifts, with one person always responsible for keeping it alive. Even in dreams, someone is awake, watching, ensuring that the night passes safely. Experts remain divided on whether people preferred to sleep with their heads nearest to the fire or farthest away. Some argue that closeness offered immediate warmth but also a greater risk from sparks. Others suggest that lying farther back gave a steadier comfort, though with less intensity. In either case, it is clear that the positioning of sleep was not random at all. It was another layer of a survival strategy that had been tested over generations. The imagery grows softer as you close your eyes. You can hear a pot bubbling gently on the fire, releasing the scent of a venison stew that's been thickened with corn or beans. You hear the faint rustle of a hide flap shifting in the wind, and you can feel the slow expansion and contraction of breath, not just your own, but those of every person who is around you. The fire binds all of these rhythms together. Outside, the snow is still falling. The night still howls, but inside, the fire is a world apart. It is a warmth that reaches deep into your bones, a light that softens the darkness, and a reassurance that the dawn will come. Without it, there would be no sleep, no survival, no stories. With it, entire nations endured winters that would have flattened the unprepared. And so, as you lie near the fire, watching the sparks climb like fleeting stars into the smoky roof, you understand why the hearth was never merely a tool. It was the heart itself, the pulse of winter life, the guardian of dreams, and the anchor that made each night survivable in a world without any modern warmth. The smoke hole above your head now draws your attention, a small but absolutely vital gap that has been cut into the roof of the lodge. You tilt your face upward, your eyes half closed, following the spirals of gray vapor as they drift lazily toward that opening. Sometimes the smoke finds its way out, slipping into the night air with a certain grace. Other times it clings stubbornly inside, making your lungs ache and your eyes water. This isn't a flaw of design so much as it is a constant gamble with nature. A smoke hole is both a salvation and a nuisance. It's well established that many winter dwellings, whether they were earth lodges or teepees, relied on these vents. Without them, the interior would quickly become unlivable, choking with fumes until no one could possibly rest. The vent was the only compromise that existed between retaining warmth and preserving breathable air. If you've ever tried to camp in a tent with a fire, you know the challenge all too well. Too much of an opening and all of your heat just flees. Too little and your chest tightens with the smoke. These ancient engineers understood that exact same tension, and they lived with it every single night. One curious detail that surfaces in some of the accounts is that people would sometimes position their sleeping spaces deliberately to catch the thin stream of clean air that drifted in through the hole. Imagine lying down in a crowded lodge, searching for that one invisible thread of freshness, like a personal lifeline within the surrounding haze. It might not have been much, but in the midst of the smoke-heavy air, it was enough to soothe the lungs. Archaeologists and ethnographers have long disagreed about how adjustable these vents really were. Some argue that coverings of hide could be shifted with long poles to control the airflow, a clever system that's akin to a movable skylight. Others maintain that such adjustments were too limited to be effective during harsh storms, leaving the smoke to accumulate regardless of anyone's intent. The truth likely varied from one group to another, shaped by their materials, their geography, and their traditions. The question lingers, unresolved, leaving us to imagine families improvising with each and every gust of wind. From where you're sitting, you can see how the hole serves another purpose, too. It is a connection to the sky. Through it, moonlight and starlight sometimes fall in silvery shafts, piercing the smoky haze with a fragile kind of beauty. During storms, flakes of snow drift inside, hissing as they melt on the hot coals. Children would stare upward at that shifting patch of sky, perhaps dreaming of spirits who were passing by. What seems to you like a simple vent becomes for them a window between different worlds. The sounds reinforce this sense of connection. You can hear the faint whistling of the wind as it tugs at the opening, moaning like a low, mournful flute. Occasionally, a draft slips down, swirling through the lodge before it vanishes again. The effect is both eerie and reassuring at the same time. The lodge breathes right along with the fire, inhaling and exhaling through its narrow throat to the heavens. Oddly enough, some oral histories suggest that people timed their storytelling to the flow of the smoke. When it rose steadily, it was said that the spirits were listening, so stories were told with great care. When the smoke wavered or circled, it signaled a distraction, and so the conversation shifted to more mundane topics. Whether you take this literally or as a metaphor, it adds a layer of intimacy between daily life and the unseen forces. You might wonder how anyone managed to fall asleep in such conditions, coughing and squinting their way through the haze. Yet over time, the body simply adapts. What would make you restless instead becomes a background rhythm. The scratch in your throat becomes a familiar companion. The eyes watering become a sign of warmth rather than a sign of danger. Imagine curling up beneath a hide, the smoke curling too, both of you weaving into the same nocturnal fabric. Some elders likely slept closer to the smoke hole itself, resting in slightly elevated places where the drafts kept the air a bit clearer. Children, on the other hand, were bundled low, their cradles tucked safely away from any direct gusts. It is remarkable how each person in the lodge found a niche that was suited to their body's own tolerance, as though the architecture itself guided them into their proper placement. As you close your eyes, you picture the contrast. Above, the cold stars are blazing in a vast, deep silence. Below, humans are curled in warmth, with smoke rising from their fragile shelter to mark their very existence. That thin column of vapor escaping through the hole was visible from far off, like a flag declaring, "We are here. We endure." In the end, the smoke hole was more than just ventilation. It was a compromise, a symbol, and a constant reminder that survival always dances between discomfort and relief. Through it, warmth remained possible, breath remained steady, and dreams could rise up into the night sky like sparks that are seeking a home among the stars. You shift your gaze from the smoke hole back toward the edges of the lodge, where the sleeping platforms line the walls like low shelves. These platforms are raised just slightly above the floor, enough to keep the sleepers off the cold ground, but still close enough to the radiant heat of the fire. As you crouch closer, you notice the careful layering, reed mats, woven grasses, and then generous piles of hides and furs. This arrangement is entirely deliberate. the result of centuries of fine-tuning how to transform an earthen floor into a cradle of warmth. What we know for certain is that these sleeping platforms were not individual beds, but communal spaces. Families stretched out across them, shoulder to shoulder. Children nestled in between the adults, while elders were tucked under the thickest coverings. To you, who is accustomed to the privacy of mattresses and separate bedrooms, the closeness might feel startling, but here, that proximity was its own form of insulation. Each body radiated its own heat, adding to the shared reservoir of warmth beneath the piles of hides. One odd yet fascinating practice that is occasionally mentioned in historical accounts is the use of cattail or bulrush mats beneath the furs. These mats added a bit of springiness, but more importantly, they acted as insulation. Imagine the faint rustle of the dried reeds under your back as you shift in your sleep, a sound like whispers from the very marshes where they were harvested. It's a small detail, yet it reveals how these people turned every single natural material into a tool for survival. Researchers still disagree about how standardized these platforms were across different regions. Some evidence suggests there were elaborate raised wooden frames in certain villages, while others relied on simpler earthen benches that were dug right into the wall. The disagreement reflects just how diverse native technologies were, all adapted to local resources, climate, and cultural preferences. What unites them, however, is the guiding principle: never lie directly on the frozen ground if you want to wake up alive. The sensory world of these platforms comes alive when you imagine lying down. Your body sinks slightly into the reeds, cushioned yet still firm. The pelts drape heavily over you, their coarse exteriors feeling rough, but the underfur soft against your skin. You can smell the lingering musk of buffalo, the faint resinous odor of pine where the mats were stitched, and the omnipresent overlay of wood smoke. Each inhale carries the memory of the material's origins, from riverbanks, forests, and prairies, now all woven together to guard you in the night. Children, restless by nature, would wriggle under the furs, giggling until they were hushed by their tired parents. Elders might lie perfectly still, conserving their energy, their breath shallow but steady. Dogs often curled up at the edges of the platforms, adding their own warmth and vigilance to the circle. The arrangement was never random. It was a carefully orchestrated choreography of survival, where every single presence had its place. You might be surprised to learn that the bedding itself was sometimes perfumed with herbs. Sweetgrass or sage could be tucked into the layers, both for their scent and for their believed protective properties. Imagine drifting off to sleep with the soft sweetness of grass mingling with the smoke, an aromatic lullaby that blurred the line between physical comfort and sacred ritual. The debates continue among anthropologists about whether these platforms also doubled as daytime spaces for socializing. Some argue they were strictly for rest, while others note that in cramped winter lodges, there was very little division of space. Children played on them, women worked on them, and stories were told on them. In such a view, the platforms were not just beds, but stages where daily life unfolded. As your own body relaxes in this imagined place, you notice how still the night becomes. The fire crackles, but most of the voices have faded away, replaced by the rhythmic breathing of dozens of sleepers all around you. The sound is hypnotic, an undulating tide of inhalations and exhalations, carrying you into a state of drowsiness. The fire's glow softens, and the hides press heavier, grounding you in a warmth that seems almost miraculous against the frozen world just outside. And yet there is a fragility here. One log forgotten on the fire, one single gap left unsealed in the wall, and the cold would slip right back in. Sleep is always balanced on the knife's edge of vigilance and trust. That is why families pressed so close together on these platforms, trusting in one another's bodies just as much as they trusted in the hides and the mats. So when you close your eyes and imagine yourself there, with reeds beneath you, hides above you, and kin beside you, you understand that sleeping platforms were never just furniture. They were extensions of the community itself, woven from earth and grass and bound by warmth and proximity. In their embrace, people learned to sleep not in isolation, but in communion, resting in layers of both material and human connection alike. You notice just how close the sleepers are to one another. Arms brush in the dark, legs tangle beneath the hides, and every single inhale is answered by another body's exhale. In this world, solitude is a luxury that you simply cannot afford. Warmth comes not from distance, but from the press of shoulders and the steady rhythm of shared breath. You realize that here, in a winter lodge, the phrase body heat takes on its truest and most literal meaning. Contemporary accounts remind us that across countless tribes, families slept in clusters, sometimes 3 or 4 people huddled under the same pile of hides. A single person wrapped up alone might shiver all night, but pressed together, the human furnace became astonishingly effective. To you, used to sleeping alone in a wide bed, the intimacy might seem completely overwhelming. Yet here, it was the simplest and surest guarantee against freezing to death. One curious practice sometimes described in oral traditions involves deliberately arranging the sleepers by age and by role. Children, who were the most vulnerable to the cold, were tucked in between their parents, cocooned on both sides. Elders might be positioned deeper in the lodge, away from any drafts, where the fire's heat was the most steady. Even dogs or puppies were invited into the pile, their small bodies contributing a surprising amount of warmth. Picture it fur against fur, skin against skin, an entire household forming a single living quilt. Some scholars argue over just how intentional these arrangements really were. Did families meticulously assign positions each and every night, or did these habits evolve naturally through repeated winters of survival? The evidence is mixed, leaving you to imagine the nightly shuffle, bodies adjusting until everyone found their own pocket of comfort. Whatever the case may have been, the result was the same, a collective defense against the biting cold. Lying there, you would feel it instantly, the radiant warmth of another body right beside you. At first, it might make you feel restless, your sense of personal space completely dissolved. But as the hours stretched on, you would begin to treasure that steady warmth, the subtle rise and fall of a sibling's chest against your shoulder, the heartbeat of a parent felt faintly through the layers of hides. The cold outside could never replicate such an intimacy. Oddly enough, some ethnographers recorded that children sometimes wriggled free from the communal piles, seeking their own little adventure in a corner of the lodge. They often crept back quickly, their noses numb and their hands chilled, realizing that independence came with an icy cost. The lesson was both immediate and unforgettable. Togetherness was not optional here. The sensory detail is truly striking. You can imagine the heavy musk of multiple bodies mingling with the sharp tang of wood smoke. The hides grow damp with condensed breath, and frost begins to form along their outer edges. The heat is uneven. Your toes may still feel chilled, but your chest stays warm, pressed tightly against others. This unevenness is part of the experience, a reminder that survival isn't always comfortable, but it's always possible when it's shared. There's an echo here of something universal. Even in your own life, you've likely felt the instinct to huddle with others when the air grows cold. Think of power outages, camping trips, or nights when the blankets just weren't enough. That primal pull toward another body's warmth is ancient, coded into your very cells. The difference here is that for native communities in these winter camps, it wasn't a rare exception. It was the nightly norm. Experts remain divided over whether this closeness fostered stronger social bonds, or if it created tensions. Did the constant contact breed affection, or did it spark irritations? Perhaps it was both. Imagine drifting into sleep soothed by a loved one's warmth, only to be jolted awake by a neighbor's elbow in your ribs. These contradictions made life rich, imperfect, and profoundly human. The psychological comfort may have been just as important as the physical heat. To fall asleep in a circle of your kin was to be reminded that you were not alone in facing the endless night. The cold world outside could rage with storms, but inside, pressed close with others, you carried a fortress of shared warmth with you. Dreams, too, must have carried this sense of collective safety, visions shaped not in isolation, but in the presence of a breathing, living community. As you lie in that pile of hides and bodies, your modern instinct might whisper of discomfort. But soon, as your skin adjusts to the mingled heat and your mind softens into drowsiness, you would recognize the genius of it all. Shared body heat was not merely a necessity. It was an unspoken covenant of care. It said, we survive this together, or we do not survive at all. And so, in the winter lodges, sleep was not a solitary act, but a communal ritual. Every single night reinforced the truth that warmth comes from one another. Every dawn proved that huddling close, messy, intimate, and imperfect was enough to keep life moving forward in a frozen world. Step back outside for just a moment, and you'll see the camp has been transformed into something extraordinary. Snow piles high around the lodges, banked carefully by human hands. At first glance, you might think these drifts are just obstacles, something to be cleared away. But here, snow is not an enemy. It is an ally, pressed into service as an insulator, sealing warmth inside the fragile shelters. It's well known among archaeologists that many native groups used snow intentionally, piling it up against their lodge walls or around the bases of teepees to cut off drafts. The trick was simple yet absolutely brilliant. Cold air cannot pass easily through compacted snow, and what seems freezing on the outside becomes a protective layer. You can picture families working together with shovels, or even just their hands, patting the white mounds into place like they were working with clay. You might be surprised to learn that some winter shelters were even built directly from snow itself. Accounts from Inuit and other Arctic peoples describe igloos, domes carved from blocks of snow that were stacked in spirals. Inside, these spaces stayed astonishingly warm, often above freezing, while outside the temperature might plunge far, far below zero. Imagine lying inside such a dome, your own body heat trapped in the compacted snow, while the howling wind rages on just beyond your walls. Among the plains and woodland tribes, though, snow was used more often as a supportive material than a structure, packed around their dwellings. It stiffened the walls and muffled the sound. At night, you'd hear the muffled hush as gusts of wind hit the drifts and simply slid away, unable to pierce the camp's defenses. Even today, researchers still discuss whether this technique was widely adopted out of pure necessity or whether it also carried a ceremonial meaning. Was the snow merely insulation, or was it also seen as the earth's own blanket, a sacred cover gifted to them in the winter? The sensory world of such a snowbound camp is truly unforgettable. Outside, the cold bites at your face, but as you run your hands along the packed drifts, they feel smooth, firm, and surprisingly solid. The air close to the snow walls is hushed, absorbing sound so thoroughly that your footsteps seem to be swallowed before they can even echo. You feel as though the camp itself is wrapped up in a protective cocoon. Inside, the difference is immediate. The warmth of the fire and the body stays contained, rebounding off the fur and the earth, trapped by the icy barricades that are just outside. Frost forms on the inner walls, delicate crystals glinting in the firelight. Children sometimes would press their fingers against these frosty patterns, marveling at how close beauty and danger could sit together. You can almost hear their laughter echoing softly, even as the cold nips at the cracks in the doorway. Oddly enough, some explorers recorded seeing snow deliberately shoveled onto the roofs of lodges as well. The added weight pressed the hides tighter against the frame and increased the insulation, much like the way a heavy quilt pins you into your bed. To a modern eye, this might seem like tempting a collapse, but to those who practiced it, the method was controlled, and the snow acted as an additional shield. Ethnographers continue to puzzle over whether the snow piling was always planned, or if it was sometimes accidental, with the natural drift of the wind simply being adopted as protection. The evidence is mixed. Yet what matters more is the ingenuity behind using every single element of the environment to survive. What threatens you in one form can save you in another. Imagine drifting into sleep in such a snow-protected lodge. Outside, the night howls, wolves cry in the distance, and the wind sweeps across the plains like an invisible hand. But inside, you are completely cocooned, with the fire flickering, furs piled high, and snow mounded thick all around the walls. The silence is deep, broken only by soft snores and the occasional crack of burning wood. You breathe in the warmth, and for a few hours, the cold world outside completely disappears. The beauty lies in the paradox. Snow, the very symbol of winter's cruelty, becomes the shield that allows you to rest. The drifts outside, sculpted by hands and winds alike, are the quiet guardians of your sleep. And so you learn a lesson that these communities knew instinctively, that survival means rethinking the elements, turning hardship into shelter, and finding comfort in what at first appears to be hostile. As you wander further across the snowy camp, your eye is drawn to a very different kind of dwelling. Unlike the earth lodges that sink down into the soil, these rise up tall and lean, their frames of poles stretching upward in a graceful cone. These are teepees, portable homes that were built for motion, easy to raise and dismantle, yet surprisingly capable of holding warmth against the biting winds. Their pointed shapes cut elegantly into the winter sky, each one rimmed with snow along its base, each one glowing faintly from the fire that burns within. It's well documented that the peoples of the plains, such as the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the Blackfoot, relied heavily on teepees for both their summer mobility and their winter survival. They were designed for a nomadic life, following the buffalo, so they had to be sturdy enough to endure blizzards, yet light enough to carry across the open grasslands. Their form was a work of practical genius. Long poles were lashed together and then covered in buffalo hides that were stitched tightly, with a smoke flap at the top to vent both heat and haze. One curious detail you may not expect is that teepees were sometimes lined with an extra layer of hides during the winter. This inner cover created an insulating pocket of air between the two walls, much like the double-paned windows that you know today. Imagine the effect, the wind hammering away on the outside, but inside, a buffer of still air is preserving the warmth. It's the kind of clever adaptation that makes you realize these dwellings were not just temporary shelters, but examples of refined engineering born from centuries of experience. Experts remain divided on just how warm teepees could actually become in sub-zero temperatures. Some argue that even with multiple hides and an interior fire, they remained chilly when compared to the earth lodges. Others insist that with proper insulation and careful placement of the fire, a teepee could be surprisingly comfortable, even in the deep snow. Both views likely hold some truth, depending on the wind direction, the resources available, and the skill of those who were tending the flames. Step inside one now, and you can feel the immediate intimacy of its smaller space. The fire crackles in the center, its smoke funneling upward through the open flap. Around the edge, sleeping mats are laid out in a circle, each space claimed by family members who curl up beneath the furs. The walls slope inward, making the room feel like a cocoon, and the poles above cross in a lattice, silhouetted against the smoky sky. You can almost hear the faint whistle of wind sneaking through the seams, a constant reminder of the fragile boundary between life and death. Oddly enough, some early explorers noted how easily a teepee could be taken down, packed onto a travois, and moved in under an hour. Imagine that. The very same structure that protected you from a blizzard one night might be folded away and carried across the plains the very next morning. This mobility was not a luxury, but a necessity in a landscape where the herds of buffalo dictated survival. Even in the heart of winter, adaptability was always the rule. The sensory experience of sleeping in a teepee differs from that of an earth lodge. The ground feels closer here, the hides are tighter, and the space is smaller. You curl in closer to your kin, the firelight painting shadows that climb the slanted walls. The smell of smoke is sharper, more concentrated in the narrower space, and you find yourself breathing more shallowly to adjust. The hides rustle faintly when the wind presses against them, and the snow outside sometimes slides down the conical sides with a muffled sigh. Some anthropologists suggest that the teepee's shape itself carried a symbolic meaning. Its rising cone, echoing the connection between the earth and the sky. Others argue that practicality outweighed any symbolism, that the cone simply offered the strongest shape against the powerful wind. The debate continues, but as you lie there, your eyes following the smoke as it drifts upward, it's easy to believe that both meanings could coexist, a shelter that was at once both functional and spiritual. Children here drift into sleep with stories that are whispered by their parents, their eyes closing as sparks leap upward into the vent. Dogs curl up at the edge, their noses tucked beneath their tails, while the fire shrinks into a bed of glowing coals. The hides above hold firm against the storm, and the snow at the base thickens into insulation. And within this fragile cone, a family dreams together. As you imagine pulling a buffalo hide tighter around yourself, the wisdom of these portable teepees becomes clear. They were more than just tents. They were lifeline structures that allowed entire nations to follow the rhythm of the land, to sleep through blizzards, and to awaken, ready to move on again. In their flickering light, you can sense both fragility and resilience, woven together into a dwelling that has endured for centuries. The closer you look at the camp, the more you realize how central the buffalo hides were to absolutely everything here. They are not just walls or blankets. They are the very fabric of survival itself. Picture one stretched taut over the frame of a teepee, its thick fur turned outward to deflect the icy wind. Another lies across a sleeping platform, its softness turned inward, warming the skin of those who curl up beneath it. Every single seam, every stitch, is a testament to how much life depended entirely on the buffalo. Archaeological evidence shows that the winter hides were harvested at just the right season. Buffalo that were killed in the late autumn carried thick, dense coats, designed by nature to shield the animals from blizzards. When they were tanned and prepared, these hides became almost impenetrable barriers against the elements. Families might spend weeks working on them, scraping, stretching, and smoking them until they were supple enough to bend, but tough enough to withstand the storms. To lie beneath one was to borrow the buffalo's own strength for your own survival. One unusual practice that was recorded by early observers was the use of multiple hides layered together like shingles. Outer hides might be arranged so that snow and rain would slide downward, while the inner hides trapped the precious heat. Imagine the care it must have taken to position them correctly, knowing that one single gap could let icy drafts creep in. It's the same logic that you find in modern waterproof jackets, layers protecting layers, with each having its own specific purpose. But the debate among historians still persists. Were buffalo hides primarily chosen for their physical properties, or did a spiritual reverence also dictate their use? Some argue that the animal's role as a sacred provider of food, tools, shelter, and clothing meant that its hides carried a symbolic power that went beyond just practicality. Others suggest that necessity came first, with the spiritual meaning growing later out of sheer dependence. The answer may be both, intertwined so closely that it's impossible to separate them. The sensory detail of these hides is incredibly vivid. You run your fingers across the outer side, feeling the coarse, wiry fur bristling like frozen grass. You flip it over and the underside is smooth, smoky from the tanning process, and faintly oily with the animal fat that was used for preservation. The smell is musky, a blend of earth and beast, lingering even after months and months of use. At night, wrapped up tightly, you would breathe this scent in your dreams, comforted by its deep familiarity. You might be surprised to learn that buffalo hides were not only functional, but sometimes they were decorative as well. Certain families painted them with geometric designs or scenes from hunts, transforming a simple blanket into a canvas of memory. Imagine drifting to sleep beneath such images, the day's victories or visions of the spirit world hovering just above your resting body. Warmth and storytelling became completely inseparable. In the firelight, you can picture children burrowing beneath a massive hide, with only their noses poking out, their eyes heavy with sleep. Elders who were slower to warm up might drape additional layers over themselves, cocooning themselves until their bodies finally relaxed. Dogs would nestle close, their fur mingling with the buffalo's, creating a tapestry of warmth that was woven from many different lives. Ethnographers still discuss whether every family had equal access to high-quality hides. Did the wealthier hunters or the more skilled tanners claim the thickest, warmest ones, leaving others to make do with thinner skins? Or was there a more communal sharing of resources in the winter camps? The accounts vary, reflecting the diversity of the cultures and the shifting realities of scarcity. As you curl into your imagined bedding now, you can feel the immense weight of the hide as it settles across your body. It is heavy, yes, but the heaviness is comforting rather than smothering. The cold cannot penetrate it. You breathe deeply, inhaling the musky warmth, and your muscles relax in gratitude. The buffalo's body, which once roamed the plains, now shelters you in the heart of winter. Oddly enough, some hides were so thick that families joked they were nearly impossible to fold or roll up for travel. The humor lightens the harshness of the season, a reminder that even in survival, laughter always found its place. Picture someone wrestling with a stiff hide, grumbling to themselves while children giggle nearby. Proof that resilience isn't only found in strength, but also in spirit. And so, in the deep winter nights, buffalo hides became more than just materials. They were guardians, canvases, and companions. To sleep under them was to rest in the gift of a creature that gave everything, from its meat to its shelter, from its sinew to its stories. Each night spent beneath their warmth was another night that the camp endured, another dream safely carried into the morning. You step toward the edge of the camp now, where the cold sharpens into something even more biting. Here, families who live by the sea or along icy rivers keep a different kind of light glowing through the night. You duck beneath the flap of their shelter, and you're met not with the crackle of a wood fire, but with the steady, bluish flame of a stone lamp that is burning oil. The glow is gentler, lower, and the air carries the faint scent of seal fat. It feels less like a roaring hearth and more like a heartbeat, constant, understated, yet absolutely essential. Records from Arctic and subarctic peoples, the Inuit, the Yupik, and others, describe these lamps, known as a quilik, as the very center of their domestic life. They were made from carved stone, often soapstone, and the lamp held rendered oil from a seal, a whale, or a fish. A moss or plant wick absorbed the liquid and burned with a steady flame. In the winter, this single object provided light, heat, and even a surface for cooking. To imagine a night without one is to imagine a darkness that would swallow every single corner of your dwelling. What might surprise you is just how versatile these lamps were. Women tended to them constantly, trimming the wicks with delicate bone tools to keep the flame burning steady. The lamp could be brightened for weaving or dimmed for sleeping. With practice, a single quillet could burn for hours on end, its glow sustaining both warmth and morale. In a place where driftwood was scarce and fires were a true luxury, this modest little flame was everything. There's still discussion among historians about how much heat such lamps truly generated. Some suggest that they were enough to keep small snow houses above freezing, making the difference between life and death. Others argue that the warmth was modest, better for cooking and for light than for actually heating a room. The truth, most likely, lies somewhere in between, a gentle heat that was amplified by furs, by bodies, and by the clever architecture of the snow shelters. Close your eyes and imagine the sensory world of a lamplit night. Shadows sway across the curved snow walls, turning the room into a flickering dreamscape. The flame hisses softly as the oil burns, a sound as soothing as rain on a canvas. The smell is pungent, fatty, and almost sweet, clinging to your clothes and your hair until it becomes inseparable from memory. You lie beneath the hides, your face tingling with warmth where the light touches it, but your back is still chilled by the icy floor. This uneven comfort is strangely calming, reminding you that survival is about balance, not about perfection. Oddly enough, explorers recorded stories of the lamp flames being so steady that children would fall asleep just watching them, hypnotized by the soft blue glow. In their dreams, the flame became the sun, promising that warmth would return again. Imagine drifting off with that image, an eternal miniature sun flickering right above you, whispering that tomorrow is possible. Anthropologists continue to puzzle over the symbolic role of these lamps. Were they simply practical, or were they also sacred representations of life itself? Many oral traditions point to the latter. The lamp flame was often associated with the spirit of the home, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, light always endured. The women who tended them carried an immense responsibility, for to let the lamp go out meant letting the home itself fade away into peril. The practical details remain absolutely fascinating. The oil had to be collected, rendered, and stored carefully, often in sealskin bags. The wicks were trimmed with incredible precision to avoid smoking too heavily. Every single family knew that their lamp's health mirrored their own. A sputtering wick warned of hunger, while a strong, steady flame meant security. Now, imagine yourself curled up in one of these coastal shelters. The sound of the wind is muffled by the thick snow walls. The only illumination is a small flame painting orange arcs on your hide blanket. Outside, the waves crash against the ice, their roar softened by the distance. Inside, the steady hiss of the lamp is the very last thing you hear before you fall asleep. Your dreams begin to mingle with its glow, fragile but so resilient. The irony here is striking. The coldest, harshest environments gave rise to the smallest, most delicate sources of warmth. Yet these tiny flames were enough to carry entire communities through the endless winters. They remind you that survival isn't always about abundance. Sometimes, it's about making just one flame last the entire night, and trusting that it will be enough to see the dawn. You linger now in the quiet of a lodge, where the daylight filters weakly through the smoke hole, catching on the shimmer of tools that are laid neatly against the wall. They gleam faintly, made of bone and antler, shaped by careful hands into instruments that can transform stiff, raw hides into bedding that is soft enough to cradle tired bodies. You crouch closer, running your eyes over the scrapers, the awls, and the fleshing tools. Each one is smooth from years and years of use. These were not decorative objects at all. They were the difference between shivering on rough, stiff skins and sinking into supple blankets that could hold warmth all through the night. Archaeologists have uncovered countless examples of these implements, confirming just how central they were to winter survival. A bone scraper fashioned from a bison's rib could strip all the flesh and fat from a hide. An antler awl could punch holes for stitching, binding the pieces together into mats or covers. To sleep on hides that were untreated was to risk both discomfort and drafts. To prepare them properly was to create an insulation that was as effective as any modern quilt. One unexpected trick that is described in early accounts involved using sand or even pumice to rub the hides smoother, reducing their stiffness. Imagine the rasping sound of the stone against the skin, the slow transformation of a stiff, frozen sheet into something flexible enough to drape across your shoulders. It was painstaking work, often performed by women, and it filled the long hours of the winter nights with the steady rhythm of scraping and softening. But researchers still disagree on the exact methods that were used by different regions. Some insist that smoking the hides was absolutely essential, infusing them with protective oils and a pungent scent that lingered in every single lodge. Others argue that oiling them with animal fat achieved a softer texture, though it also made the hides much heavier. Evidence suggests that both methods were used, depending on the climate and the available resources. The debate continues, leaving us to imagine the variety of scents and textures that filled the winter shelters all across the continent. The sensory details are unmistakable. As you touch one of these prepared hides, it creaks slightly, pliant but still firm. The smell is sharp, a mix of smoke, fat, and the earthy musk of the animal, clinging to every single fiber. The tools themselves feel cold in your hand, their edges worn smooth but still incredibly strong. You can almost hear the scraping echoing in your ears, a repetitive sound that might lull you if you were lying nearby, drifting off into sleep as others worked by the fire. Oddly enough, some oral traditions mention that children were given miniature scrapers to mimic the work of the adults. They learned by copying them, their tiny hands making smaller arcs against scraps of hide. It was both play and practice, preparing them for the day when survival would depend entirely on their skill. Picture a little one curling up afterward beneath the very same fur they had helped to prepare, a warmth that was earned by their own small effort. The tools weren't only for bedding, of course. They were used to craft clothing, moccasins, and tent covers. But at night, when you settled into your sleeping space, the difference was felt most vividly. A properly softened hide draped fluidly across your body, holding in the heat without any stiffness. A poorly prepared one would crack, shift, or let drafts sneak right through. The quality of your sleep was tied directly to the craftsmanship of these humble bone and antler tools. Ethnographers continue to marvel at the efficiency of such simple instruments. In a modern world that is obsessed with metal and machines, It is easy to underestimate just how effective bone and antler could be. Yet these communities proved otherwise. What mattered was not the material itself, but the knowledge that was etched into its use. As you imagine lying back now, wrapped in hides that were softened by countless hours of scraping, you feel a deep appreciation for the labor that is behind every single fold of warmth. Each blanket is not just the gift of an animal, but also the patient work of human hands. Every stitch, every softened seam, is a story of resilience that is written into the fabric. And so, as you drift into sleep in this imagined lodge, the quiet scraping still echoes faintly in your ears. It is the lullaby of survival, a rhythm that turned bone into tools, hides into bedding, and bitter winter nights into places of true rest. Without these humble instruments, warmth would have been fleeting. With them, entire families could dream beneath the steady glow of the firelight, wrapped in layers of comfort that were both natural and handmade. You settle deeper into the lodge, and soon your nose catches something unexpected. It's not just the smoke or the musk of the hides. It's the faint, sweet tang of herbs that are slowly releasing their fragrance into the air. Someone has tossed a bundle of sage onto the fire, and the gray-green leaves curl and crackle, filling the room with a sharp, cleansing scent. You lean closer, inhaling, and you realize this was not merely to mask an odor. It was a comfort, a ritual, and sometimes even a form of medicine. Historical accounts confirm that many native communities relied on plants like sage, cedar, or sweetgrass to brighten the long winter nights. These herbs burned with distinctive aromas that were believed to purify spaces and calm restless spirits. They also had a practical value. Cedar's resinous smoke could repel insects, while sage cleared the musty smells from hides that were dampened with condensation. It's remarkable how one small addition to the fire could completely transform the atmosphere of a shelter. You might be surprised to learn that some herbs were tucked directly into the bedding. Sprigs of sweetgrass, braided and dried, could be woven into the mats or hidden beneath the hides, releasing their fragrance when they were pressed by the weight of bodies. Imagine lying down after a long day out in the snow, pulling a fur up to your chin, and catching the faint perfume of plants that were harvested in warmer months. It was like keeping a small piece of summer alive in the very depths of winter. Scholars still debate how much of this use was purely practical, and how much of it carried a spiritual weight. Some argue that burning the herbs was primarily about improving the air quality in the cramped, smoky lodges. Others emphasize their role in ceremonies, in the ritual smudging to cleanse negative energies and invite dreams that were free of harm. Perhaps both were true, and each fire was a mixture of both medicine and meaning. The sensory richness is absolutely undeniable. As the herbs burn, the smoke thickens with a sharper edge than would smoke alone. Your throat tingles, but in a refreshing way, and the aroma lingers on your skin. The sound is gentle, a soft hiss as the oils are released, followed by a faint crackle. Around you, people breathe in deeply, their eyes softening, their shoulders relaxing. It's as though the plants reach into more than just their lungs, they ease their minds too. Oddly enough, some oral traditions mention that cedar boughs were laid across the floor of the shelters before the bedding was spread out. These layers not only added insulation, but they also released their fragrance when they were walked upon. Children may have giggled at the crunch underfoot, while the adults appreciated the subtle comfort that it offered. Even the simple act of stepping into a lodge could feel welcoming when the air smelled of cedar instead of damp hides. Imagine drifting towards sleep with these scents weaving all around you. Outside, the snow is falling, heavy and silent, pressing down on the world. Inside, the air is alive with the sweetness of burning grass, the resinous depth of cedar, and the sharp clarity of sage. The herbs mingle with the smoke, creating a kind of incense that blurs the line between survival and serenity. Researchers continue to wonder how much these aromatic practices shape the psychology of winter life. Did the familiar smell of sage reassure children in the same way that lavender soothes you today? Did the cedar smoke drifting upward feel like a bridge between the material and the sacred? What's clear is that these scents created a continuity, linking one winter to the next, one generation to another. As you pull a hide tighter around your shoulders in this imagined space, the fragrance clings to the fabric. You close your eyes, and for a moment, the walls of the lodge seem to breathe right along with you. The herbs whisper of summer meadows, of green forests, of times when warmth was easy to come by. They remind you that even in the coldest months, people carried memory and hope into their dreams. So the night becomes not only a place of endurance but also of gentle ritual. Sleep is guided not just by fire and furs, but by the invisible threads of scent that weave a sense of calm through the air. In this way, the herbs became companions to rest, fragile, fragrant guardians that turned smoke-filled lodges into sanctuaries of both warmth and spirit alike. The fire has burned low now, its light dim, and your attention shifts to a smaller bundle that is tucked near the warmest part of the lodge. There, a baby lies swaddled so tightly in furs that only its face is peeking out, its cheeks rosy with the heat of sleep. You watch as the infant breathes steadily, its tiny chest rising and falling beneath the soft rabbit fur wrappings. The stillness of the night is broken only by a soft whimper, which is quickly soothed by a mother's gentle hand stroking across the bundle. What we know from ethnographic records is that native families often crafted cradle boards or swaddling wraps that were lined with the softest materials available. Rabbit fur, squirrel fur, or even bird down. These were not mere luxuries but essential safeguards. Children's bodies cooled very quickly, and without careful protection, frostbite or even worse could set in. The cradle board, often padded with furs and propped up near the fire, became both a bed and a guardian. You might be surprised to learn that moss was sometimes used as a diapering material inside these cradles. It was dried and softened, and it absorbed moisture while adding a cushion. Mothers would replace it frequently, ensuring that their bobbies stayed dry and comfortable all through the night. Picture the faint, earthy smell of the moss mingling with the smoke and the fur, the natural equivalent of baby powder, but harvested from streams and forests. Researchers continue to debate whether infants were always kept close to the fires, or if they were sometimes placed in colder spots, wrapped in many layers to accustom them gradually to the chill. Some oral traditions suggest that exposure actually toughened their bodies, while others emphasize the need to shield them constantly from the cold. Perhaps both practices coexisted, shaped by circumstance, by the season, and by family belief. The sensory world of these infant beds is incredibly tender. The fur is unbelievably soft, tickling against a mother's fingers as she tucks it closer around the baby. The cradle creaks faintly when it is adjusted, its wooden frame warmed by the nearby fire. The child's breath is sweet and warm, misting briefly in the cool drafts that still snake their way along the floor. You can almost hear the soft hum of a lullaby, the words too quiet to catch, vibrating like a heartbeat against the still air. Oddly enough, some cradle boards were decorated with beads, quills, or charms that were meant to protect the child. These adornments would dangle softly as the baby shifted, catching the light from the fire. They weren't simply aesthetic. They were symbols of prayer and protection, reminders that sleep was a vulnerable journey and that it needed safeguards that went beyond just physical warmth. The entire community often shared in the responsibility. Older siblings might sit nearby, tasked with watching over the cradle through the night. Elders sometimes told stories over the sleeping infant, believing that their words could shape the child's dreams. Sleep here was not an individual act, but a collective promise that the youngest members of the community would wake up safely to see another day. Imagine yourself as that infant for just a moment, cocooned in a warmth so complete that the winter outside simply ceases to exist. You cannot move very much, but you don't need to. Every one of your senses is flooded with reassurance. The heat of the fire, the weight of the furs, the faint vibration of a song, the steady murmur of voices close by. The world beyond the hides and the snow is completely irrelevant. All that matters is the cocoon. Some anthropologists note how these swaddling traditions carried a lifelong influence. To grow up pressed close in a community, wrapped in hides, taught that security came not from solitude but from connection. Bobbies learned from their very first nights that warmth was a shared experience, and that survival was a collective act. Even in their sleep, this lesson seeped into their bones and their breath. As the mother leans over now, pulling the cradle board a little closer to the fire, you can sense the quiet rhythm of care that has been repeated across generations. Night after night, winter after winter, children were kept safe, not by machines or manufactured fabrics, but by the ingenuity of hides, moss, and loving hands. And so, when you close your eyes in this scene, you realize that sleep in a winter camp was never just about endurance. It was about trust. Trust that the mothers would tend the flames, that the siblings would keep watch, that the furs would hold, and that the cradle's soft lining would protect. In that trust, infants dreamed peacefully, wrapped in the warmth of both their family and the natural world. You shift your gaze across the dim firelight, and there, close to the heart of the lodge, sit the elders. Their faces are lined with the years of winters they have endured, their movements slower but still steady, their very presence anchoring the room like stones in a river. They do not toss or fidget as the young people do. Instead, they sit or lie in a deep stillness, wrapped in heavy robes of fur, conserving their energy in a way that seems almost meditative. It's clear from oral traditions that the elders held a special role during these bitter nights. They were the keepers of memory, the teachers who carried the lessons of past winters into the present. To watch them in the firelight was to see a living reminder that survival is not about rushing, but about endurance, a quiet patience that can outlast any storm. Children learned by their example, observing how the old ones breathed slowly, how they wasted no movements, how they let a sense of calm settle deep into their bones. One detail that might surprise you is that the elders were often given the warmest spots in the lodge, not out of indulgence, but out of deep respect. Nearer the hearth, where the heat was steady and the drafts were less cruel, they slept more comfortably, their frail bodies protected by the warmth they had once worked so hard to secure for the younger generations. This was a reciprocal circle of care. They had safeguarded the community in their strength, and now the community safeguarded them in their age. Yet, historians remain divided about whether these elders were entirely shielded from hardship, or if they bore a different kind of burden. Some argue that they were sheltered, excused from the heavy tasks in the winter. Others suggest that their wisdom carried responsibilities that kept them awake longer, watching the fires, whispering prayers, and reminding restless families of their traditions. The truth likely shifted with the circumstances. Sometimes the elders rested deeply, and sometimes they bore the night's heaviest weight. The sensory atmosphere around them is distinct. Their robes are thicker, layered with buffalo hides that are lined in fur, so heavy that the garments themselves seem almost immovable. When they shift, you can hear the rustle of the pelts, a dry, hushed sound. Their breath is slower, audible only when you lean in close. Their voices, when they do speak, are gravelly and deliberate, carrying an authority that comes not from force, but from gravity. Oddly enough, some oral histories recall the elders offering gentle instructions even as others were drifting into sleep. They might hum an old song, not to entertain, but to steady the nerves. They might tell a short parable, the words barely audible, meant to guide the minds of the listeners into a state of calm before they rested. Imagine lying there, your eyes half closed, as an elder's cracked voice becomes the final sound you hear before dreams take over. Anthropologists continue to discuss whether this kind of stillness was a cultural discipline or simply a survival instinct. Did the elders cultivate their composure as a lesson for the young, or did their bodies just naturally slow down after decades of winters? Whatever the cause, the effect was the same. In their presence, the lodge itself seemed steadier, calmer, and more resilient. You can picture a child stirring in the night, frightened by the howl of the wind against the walls. An elder, without even rising, murmurs a reassurance. The snow is our blanket. The fire is our heart. Rest. The child sighs and settles back down again, the words soothing not because they promise comfort, but because they come from a voice that has lived through every kind of storm. The fire crackles, the night deepens, and still the elders rest in their composed way. Their dreams, perhaps, wander further back than the others, to hunts long past, to faces that are no longer present, to seasons where they once tended the fires themselves. And yet they remain here, a part of the living circle, carrying their lessons without speaking them aloud. Patience, stillness, endurance. So when you imagine lying in that lodge, you realize the gift they offered was not only knowledge, but also their presence. In the darkest hours, their calm was a blanket as vital as any hide. The warmth of their bodies might have faded, but the warmth of their example burned steady. And in that example, entire families found the courage to close their eyes and sleep through another bitter winter night. The evening deepens, and with it comes the slow ritual of preparing food before sleep. The air inside the lodge grows richer now, layered not only with wood smoke and fur, but with the aroma of a bubbling stew. A pot, blackened from countless fires, hangs over the coals, steam curling upward in fragrant ribbons. You lean closer and you inhale. There's the gamey scent of venison, the earthy undertone of beans, the sweetness of dried berries rehydrating in the broth. Every single whiff tells a story of foraging, hunting, and preservation that has been carried through the long months. Archaeological findings confirm that many tribes preserved food in the autumn specifically for winter nights just like this. Corn was dried on the cob, beans were stored in woven bags, and strips of buffalo or deer meat were cured into jerky. These staples meant that even when storms closed in, meals could still be simmered over the hearth. By the time the stew was ladled into wooden bowls, it was more than just nourishment. It was a warmth that began inside the belly and then spread outward, loosening stiff muscles and calming minds for a night of rest. One detail you might find delightful is the practice of adding marrow bones to the pot. When they were cracked open, they released a rich fat that thickened the broth and offered crucial calories. Imagine fishing out a piece of bone, sucking out the warm marrow, and feeling the strength flood back into your body. In a world without modern vitamins, marrow was treasured like liquid gold. There's still discussion among food historians about just how varied the winter meals were. Some argue that monotony dominated, with soups and stews repeated endlessly until the spring. Others point to evidence of dried fruits, nuts, and even sweet treats that were crafted from honey or maple sugar, suggesting a surprising variety. The debate lingers, but either way, each meal was precious, and each bite was a link between endurance and comfort. The sensory details are absolutely overwhelming. You can hear the faint bubbling of the pot, the rhythmic stir of a wooden ladle scraping against its sides. The steam fogs the air, warming the faces of the families as they lean in. When you lift a bowl, the wood feels hot in your palms. The liquid inside is thick, hearty, almost too much for a sleepy stomach. But you eat anyway, savoring the way the heat spreads down your throat and into your very core. Oddly enough, some oral histories mention people deliberately eating heavy meals right before they went to sleep, believing that a full stomach kept the body warmer through the night. A full stomach was not only satisfying, but it was also protective, a buffer against the long hours when the fires might burn low. Picture the comfort of lying back afterward, burrowed under the furs, drowsy from a warmth that glows both inside and out. And then there's the communal rhythm. Food is not eaten in silence. People murmur their thanks, laugh softly at a child who is spilling their stew, and share bites with the dogs who are waiting eagerly at their feet. The act of eating together is just as important as the calories themselves. In the sharing, bonds are reaffirmed. In the nourishment, sleep becomes possible. Ethnographers have noted how the memory of a taste intertwined with the memory of a place. To eat a venison stew in the winter was to recall the autumn hunt. To sip a corn broth was to remember the summer harvest. In this way, each meal was not just sustenance, but also continuity, linking one season to the next, one generation to the other. Now, imagine finishing your bowl, setting it aside, and sinking down beneath the hides. The smell of the stew lingers in the air, comforting in its heaviness. Your stomach is full, your body is warm, and your mind is eased by the familiarity of flavors that have been passed down for centuries. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, food has become a shield against both the cold and despair alike. So it is no exaggeration to say that the winter meals before sleep were as crucial as the fire or the furs. They gave strength, comfort, and reassurance. They reminded the families that they had survived the day, that they had enough to face the night, and that in the morning, life would begin again with another pot simmering over the glowing coals. The stew pots have been emptied, the bowls have been set aside, and the fire is now tended toward a gentle glow. The lodge quiets down, yet the night is not quite ready for silence. A few voices rise softly, weaving into the smoky air, and you realize that songs are beginning, melodies that are meant to ease minds and bodies into a state of rest. These aren't loud or raucous songs. They are slow, rhythmic, almost like lullabies that have been stretched across generations. Ethnographers note that winter evenings were often filled with such songs, passed down by the elders or improvised in the moment. Some were practical, teaching children the rhythms of their language or recounting hunts. Others were purely for comfort, their tones designed to calm the restless. The repetition of the verses, paired with the crackle of the fire, created an atmosphere where eyelids grew heavy almost without any effort. You might be surprised to learn that certain songs were believed to influence the dreams themselves. A parent might sing about safe travels, good hunts, or protective spirits, guiding the subconscious of their children toward those very same visions. Imagine falling asleep not to silence, but to words that are painting safe paths through the unknown territory of your dreams. Anthropologists still debate the exact role of these winter songs. Were they primarily educational, embedding memory into the minds of the young, or were they more spiritual acts of invocation and prayer? The truth, as always, may be both. What is clear is that they were powerful tools, able to soften fear and strengthen the community, even as storms raged on outside. The sensory details here are vivid. The voices are low, some gravelly with age, others clear and high. The firelight flickers across their faces, making shadows dance in rhythm with the music. The air tastes of smoke and herbs, but now it feels lighter, buoyed by the cadence of the song. You find yourself breathing slower, matching the pace of the melody, your heart steadying into a sense of calm. Oddly enough, some travelers described dogs joining in, howling softly right along with the human voices. Rather than disrupt the song, their cries seemed to blend in, turning the lodge into a chorus that acknowledged every single living being in its circle. Imagine drifting off as human voices hum in one ear, and canine echoes in the other, together forming an unlikely harmony. Children curl closer beneath the furs, lulled not just by the warmth, but by the comfort of familiar melodies. Their eyes close as the rhythms seep into their dreams, binding memory and emotion in ways that no silence ever could. The adults, too, feel their muscles begin to loosen, their shoulders sinking lower, as the song replaces their worry with something timeless. Some researchers point out how music can alter our perception of time. In the winter, when the nights stretched out impossibly long, the songs marked the hours and made the darkness feel less endless. What could have been an oppressive silence became filled with story and with rhythm. Sleep came not as an escape, but as a natural continuation of the melody. Now, imagine yourself there, half awake, just listening. A voice hums a phrase again and again until it feels less like a song and more like a pulse, a vibration right inside your chest. Sparks leap upward from the fire. The smoke hole frames a few scattered stars, and you are suspended somewhere between wakefulness and dreams. The song carries you across that fragile threshold, reassuring you that you are safe, that the community holds you, and that the cold cannot reach what is kept in the circle of their voices. And so, the winter songs before sleep were not entertainment alone. They were medicine, memory, prayer, and lullaby all bound together. They smoothed the passage into dreams, keeping fear at bay, and reminded every single sleeper, whether they were a child, an adult, or an elder, that even in the harshest of winters, the night could be made gentle through the power of sound. The lodge is hushed now, the voices fading, the fire dimming to its quiet core of embers. You lie back, your eyes drifting shut, and soon you understand what the songs have been preparing you for: dreams. For the people here, sleep was never just physical rest. It was a portal, a chance to step into another realm where guidance could be sought and futures could be glimpsed. Historical records show that many native traditions placed great importance on dreams. They were not dismissed as random flickers of the mind, but were treated as meaningful messages. Dreams might reveal where the herds were moving, whether the hunts would succeed, or what dangers awaited them. Waking and sharing these visions was as vital as recounting real events. To dream was to converse with forces that were beyond the visible. You might be surprised to learn that some individuals undertook deliberate efforts to cultivate their dreams. A young hunter might sleep with a special object, a feather, a painted stone, or even a pouch of herbs placed near his head, hopping to summon visions of strength or guidance. Imagine lying beneath the firs, one hand curled around such a talisman, your heart thudding with anticipation of what images the night might bring. Researchers continue to debate how much dreams actually directed their daily choices. Some argue that they were central, guiding hunts and decisions with an undeniable authority. Others suggest that they were interpreted more loosely, folded into wider patterns of storytelling and intuition. Either way, dreams were woven into the very fabric of survival, shaping how people faced the next day's challenges. The sensory world of a dream-filled night is vivid, even before sleep takes hold. The fire's glow pulses against your closed eyelids. The warmth of your kin beside you steadies your breath. The faint scent of sage or cedar lingers, almost like a protective veil. Within this cocoon, the boundary between waking and dreaming begins to blur. Your ears still catch the crackle of the embers, yet in your mind, images begin to drift like smoke, forming shapes that feel more real than the lodge itself. Oddly enough, oral histories recall entire communities discussing their dreams at dawn, comparing their visions as though they were piecing together a larger puzzle. One person might see a buffalo leading them to the east, another might dream of a frozen river, and together, the messages built a map of possibilities. Dreams were not isolated events. They were shared, tested, and folded into a collective wisdom. Imagine yourself drifting into such a dream now. You are walking across an endless expanse of snow, guided by a flickering flame that dances just out of your reach. You can hear the distant echo of drums, though no one is playing them. A buffalo appears, its breath steaming, its eyes locking with yours as if it is about to speak. You wake with your heart pounding, certain that the image matters. And in this world, it absolutely does. Your dream would be told, weighed, and perhaps even acted upon. Anthropologists remain intrigued by how dreams blurred the boundary between the body and the spirit. Did the sleepers feel like they actually left their lodges, traveling across landscapes that were unseen? Or did they believe that spirits entered their shelters, whispering in the smoke and the shadows? The answers vary, but the effect is clear. Dreams gave meaning to the night, turning sleep into a form of dialogue. As you sink deeper, you realize that here, to sleep was to participate in something much larger. Rest was not wasted time, but an opportunity to gather visions. In this sense, the harshness of winter actually became a gift. The long nights allowed for longer dreams, more messages, more guidance. So when you imagine closing your eyes in that fur-lined lodge, you understand that the act of dreaming was as essential as the fire, the hides, or the food. It was another layer of survival, one that was not against the cold, but against uncertainty itself. In dreams, tomorrow could be glimpsed, fears could be soothed, and courage could be renewed. And so, through the dark of winter, the families did not merely endure. They dreamed their way forward. The dreams are flowing quietly through the lodge now, but not everyone is asleep. Someone stirs by the fire, crouching down to nudge a glowing log into place. Sparks rise and then vanish into the smoke hole, and the ember bed brightens again, pulsing with red and orange light. This is the firekeeper's task, a duty that passes from one person to another all through the long night. Without such vigilance, the coals might fade, and with them, the fragile warmth that keeps the entire community alive. Historical descriptions often note that tending the fire was a shared work. The adults rotated the responsibility, sometimes the mothers, sometimes the fathers, sometimes the older children, learning the seriousness of their role. To be trusted as a fire watcher was to be trusted with lives. One slip into negligence could mean waking up to a frozen lodge and scrambling to spark new flames. Imagine the pressure of sitting in the half-darkness, shivering while everyone else is sleeping. Your only companion is the crackle of the wood and the whisper of the wind outside. One curious detail that has been preserved in oral accounts is the way that some keepers spoke softly to the fire as they fed it. A log was not just tossed on, but was placed carefully, with words of thanks murmured under their breath. The fire was not just fuel. It was kin, an ally that deserved respect. You can almost hear the faint rustle of someone whispering as they press the kindling close, treating the flame as a living guest rather than just a tool. There's still discussion among historians about whether the firekeepers truly stayed awake the entire night, or if they relied on the embers to sustain themselves between their shifts. Some evidence suggests that carefully built coal beds could last until the morning with minimal tending. Others insist that at least one person remained alert, their eyes scanning the glow, their ears tuned to every pop and hiss. The question lingers, leaving you to picture both scenarios, the faithful watch and the trust in coals that smolder like sleeping guardians. The sensory world of this vigil is profound. The lodge is silent except for the soft breathing of the sleepers. The shadows dance across the firs as the fire flares with each adjustment. The smell is richer now, smoke mixed with resin as the fresh wood releases its oils. The floor is cold where the watcher kneels, but the heat on their face is sharp, almost scalding. Every shift in the fire's rhythm feels momentous, as if the entire night hinges on this one small flame. Oddly enough, some stories describe children waking in the night to see the sparks shooting upward, mistaking them for stars that were sneaking into the lodge. They would ask the watcher if the sky had come inside, and the adult would smile, whispering that the fire was just playing. These quiet exchanges softened the fear of the darkness, turning watchfulness into a form of reassurance. Experts remain divided about whether these fire duties also carried a ceremonial weight. Was the watcher merely being practical, or was there a sacred aspect to guarding the flame? Some traditions describe the firekeepers as spiritual protectors, ensuring that not only warmth but also harmony remained intact until the dawn. Others suggest that practicality dominated, that someone simply had to keep the embers alive. Perhaps both were true, depending on the night, the people, and the storm outside. Now, imagine yourself in that role, alone by the fire. You can hear the wind clawing at the lodge walls, the snow pelting against the hides. Inside, the silence of the sleepers surrounds you, fragile and absolute. You feed the fire, watch the coals brighten, and feel both a sense of pride and pressure in your chest. Your eyelids grow heavy, yet you fight off the sleep, knowing that the community depends on you. Each moment is stretched, every breath a tether between survival and disaster. And yet, in this half-silent vigil, there is a kind of peace. You are part of something larger, a guardian of warmth for those who are dreaming. You whisper to the flame, stroke it with a stick, and let the hours pass by. When another adult relieves you, or when the first light of dawn breaks through the smoke hole, you sink into rest with a deep satisfaction. The night has been kept, the fire has endured, and life will continue for another day. So, you see, guarding the fire was not just labor, but a form of devotion. It was the quiet promise that was repeated every single night of winter, that someone would always stay awake so that others could sleep, that no ember would be left to fade, and that warmth, fragile but steadfast, would last until the morning. The firekeeper's whispers fade, and your ears tune to the world that exists beyond the lodge walls. The night is not silent, even when it's muffled by the snow. The wilderness speaks in voices that both comfort and unsettle. You close your eyes, and each sound sharpens against the backdrop of the stillness. The long, haunting call of an owl, the distant yip of coyotes, the low, drawn-out howl of a wolf. These are not intrusions. They are the night's own music, stitched into the very fabric of sleep. Accounts from explorers and oral traditions alike remind us that native families knew these sounds intimately. They could distinguish the cry of a hunting wolf from the playful chorus of its pups. They knew which birds' calls warned of approaching weather and which was nothing more than chatter up in the trees. Where you might hear only menace, they heard meaning. A camp that was attuned to its surroundings could rest more securely, knowing what each and every sound signaled. You might be surprised to learn that some children were actually lulled by these very same noises. Parents would reassure them that the owls carried wisdom, that the coyotes were tricksters whose laughter danced through the dark, and that the wolves were kin rather than enemies. Imagine drifting into sleep, not in fear of the howls, but in the comfort that your extended family of the forest was nearby. Scholars remain divided over how much of this interpretation was practical and how much of it was spiritual. Were the wolves primarily seen as ecological companions, helping to thin the herds and keep a balance? Or were they spirit guides, their howls carrying messages across unseen worlds? The ambiguity persists, but what matters most is the way that sound anchored the people in the night, turning the unknown into something that was recognizable. The sensory details are vivid when you picture them now. The snow dampens most of the noise, but the animal calls cut through it sharply, echoing off the frozen trees. The air feels colder when the silence stretches on for too long, as if even your breath is frozen. Then, a sudden hoot breaks the quiet, and the sound reverberates against the lodge walls, startling you for an instant before it softens into a background rhythm. Oddly enough, some oral histories describe children imitating these calls from inside their lodges, giggling as they mimicked the wolves or the owls. The adults often hushed them, worried that the noise might draw predators closer, but the play still happened, proof that even fear could be turned into a game. Picture the sound of a small child's squeaky howl, followed by muffled laughter from beneath the blankets. Lying here, you can sense how these nighttime voices shape the dream world. An owl's hoot might seep into your sleep, reappearing in your visions as a messenger. A coyote's yip might become laughter in a dream, a trickster either guiding or teasing you. In this way, the border between waking and dreaming blurred even further, with each cry from the outside resonating with the inner landscapes. Researchers often point out that in environments without any mechanical noise, the human ear becomes astonishingly sensitive. A twig breaking miles away can feel immediate. A howl from beyond the horizon can seem close enough to touch. To sleep in such conditions was to live with a constant awareness, even in slumber. Safety meant not shutting out the world but letting its sounds wash over you, learning which tones signaled danger and which ones promised calm. Imagine yourself now, lying beneath the heavy hides just listening. The fire hisses softly beside you, but your focus is on the outside chorus. A wolf howls again, closer this time, its voice long and mournful. Your heart beats faster, but then it slows as you remember that you are not alone. The family beside you is breathing steadily. The lodge walls stand firm, and the fire glows red. The sound becomes less of a threat and more of a lullaby, a reminder that life continues on beyond the human shelters. So the night passes in a dialogue, the camp within, the wilderness without. Together they form the song of survival, a layered harmony where no voice is wasted. And in that harmony, sleep comes, guided by the owls, the wolves, and the coyotes, whose cries carve the darkness into something alive, something deeply human, something safe enough to dream beneath. The cries of the animals fade, replaced by a heavier silence that signals something more menacing. A storm is rolling in. The air outside thickens, and soon the first blasts of wind slam against the lodge walls. Snow hisses as it pelts the hides in the earth, seeping through any cracks that have been left unguarded. Inside, the family stir, drawing closer to the fire, checking that the furs are secure and that the children are well covered. The lodge shudders faintly, like a ship that has been caught in a frozen sea. Archaeological and ethnographic records confirm that blizzards were among the greatest threats to the winter camps. Temperatures could plunge so fast that frostbite could claim skin in just minutes. Visibility would drop to nothing, trapping hunters outside or isolating entire camps. For many, survival meant preparation, storing extra firewood, keeping food close by, and ensuring that their shelters could withstand hours or even days of the relentless snow and wind. You might be surprised to learn that some groups deliberately built temporary snow shelters during storms, even when their lodges were nearby. Packed snow, when it was sculpted properly, could resist the wind better than hides or bark. Families who were caught away from the camp could huddle inside makeshift domes or trenches, their own breath warming the walls. Imagine crouching shoulder to shoulder, listening to the muffled roar outside, while the snow itself became both your roof and your refuge. There's an ongoing debate among historians about how often entire lodges actually collapsed during severe storms. Some argue that they were sturdy enough to endure most conditions, reinforced with snow that was piled up against their bases. Others insist that collapses were inevitable, forcing the families to rebuild quickly once the skis had cleared. The lack of consensus leaves you picturing both possibilities: the terror of hearing the poles crack under the pressure, and the relief of waking up in a structure that held strong all through the night. The sensory detail is intense. Inside the lodge, the fire sputters as the gusts force the smoke downward, filling the air with an acrid haze. The hides strain, creaking under the wind's powerful grip, while frost spreads in delicate veins across their seams. Every draft feels like icy fingers creeping along your skin. You pull a fur tighter and you can hear the whisper of snow filtering in, soft but insistent, a reminder that no wall is ever perfect. Oddly enough, oral traditions speak of children being comforted during such storms by turning the noise into a story. The wind was said to be a giant's breath, and the snow, his footsteps across the world. Parents would murmur these tales to keep the fear at bay, transforming the chaos into a narrative. Imagine falling asleep to such words, the storm outside being recast as a myth rather than a menace. In these moments, survival was a collective effort. One person would check the fire, another would secure the door flaps, and another would reassure the restless. No one could face a blizzard alone. The storm outside demanded unity inside, binding the families even closer as they endured. The very act of sleeping became an assertion of trust that others would keep watch, that the lodge would hold, and that the dawn would eventually come. Researchers highlight how the storms also tested their ingenuity. If the fire threatened to die, dried dung or stored wood was rationed carefully. If the smoke overwhelmed the space, the vents were adjusted again and again, even if it meant braving the icy gusts. The storm was not simply endured. It was wrestled with moment by moment until the calm returned. Now imagine yourself there, lying under a heavy buffalo hide while the world outside just rages. You can hear the howl of the wind, the groan of the poles, the sharp hiss of the snow striking the hide. Yet inside, the circle of warmth holds. You can feel the steady presence of your kin beside you, the faint thrum of the fire at your feet. Fear lingers, yes, but so does resolve. The storm is vast, but so is the human will to endure. And so, even as the blizzards roared across the plains and the forests, sleep remained possible. It was not easy, not undisturbed, but it was possible. The shelters might bend and the fires might sputter, yet the people within found ways to rest. Each storm that was survived became another story, another memory of endurance that was passed down to the next generation. In this way, even the fiercest of the winter tempests became woven into the nightly rhythm of survival. The storm has passed, leaving the world outside washed in a pale light, the snow piled up in sculpted drifts that look like frozen waves. The camp stirs slowly, smoke curling upward once more, and you notice a few figures slipping away from the lodges. They are hunters, wrapped tightly in furs, with snowshoes strapped to their feet. Their breath puffs in a steady rhythm as they vanish into the silvered forest, heading toward the traps that they set the day before. Winter nights did not end with sleep alone. Often, they bled into moonlit wanderings, tasks that were too important to wait for the dawn. It's well documented that many tribes relied on trap lines during the winter, checking their snares for rabbits, foxes, or other small game. These excursions often happened at night or in the earliest hours of the morning, when the animals were most active. The hunters moved silently, guided by the moonlight that was reflecting off the snow, their senses tuned to every single sound. To you, the thought of leaving a warm lodge at midnight might seem unthinkable. To them, it was a necessity, another rhythm of survival that was woven right into their sleep. You might be surprised to learn that the snow itself provided enough light for them to travel. On clear nights, the moon and the stars reflected so brilliantly off the frozen ground that the shadows stretched out long and sharp, as though the world were painted in silver. Imagine stepping through that glow, hearing the crunch of the snow under your feet, seeing your own shadow glide across the drifts like a silent companion. Scholars still debate how much these nocturnal journeys were purely practical versus spiritual. Some suggest that the hunters saw them as extensions of their daily chores, just checking the traps to ensure there would be food. Others point to oral traditions that describe the night as a liminal time, when the spirits walked closer, when guidance might be found in the quiet. Perhaps each step out into the snow was both a pursuit of food and a walk through a mystery. The sensory experience of such wanderings is unforgettable. The air is sharper, cleaner, carrying the sense of pine and frost. The silence is immense, broken only by the snap of a branch or the distant call of an owl. Your breath freezes on your scarf, turning the fabric stiff. The snowshoes creak with every step, distributing your weight so that you float across the drifts rather than sinking into them. Each motion feels deliberate, each sound magnified in the stillness. Oddly enough, some accounts describe the hunters carrying glowing embers in small containers to relight fires at distant shelters. Imagine the glow of a coal cupped in a wooden or clay vessel, casting a faint red light across the snow. It was not just warmth that they carried, but continuity, the fire of one hearth extended out into the wilderness. As you picture these journeys, you realize how deeply they shaped the rhythm of rest. Sleep was never absolute. It was broken by duty, by the need to check the traps to ensure that food would be waiting in the morning. Some family members might slumber on undisturbed, while others rose in the coldest hours, shouldering a responsibility that kept everyone alive. Ethnographers note how these trips blurred the line between waking and dreaming. The hunters often spoke of visions that they had seen in the snow, animals appearing in the moonlight, shadows mistaken for spirits. Fatigue mingled with imagination, turning the landscape into a stage where both reality and vision played out. When they returned, they brought back not only meat or fur, but also stories of what they had glimpsed beneath the moon. Now imagine yourself as one of them, leaving the warmth of the lodge to step out into the icy silence. Your breath crackles, your fingers ache, but your eyes adjust to the brightness of the snow. You follow a trail of rabbit prints. You check a snare, and you reset it with a practiced care. Above you, the stars glitter, indifferent yet eternal. You feel both small and powerful, a part of a cycle that is older than memory. When you return to the lodge, your cheeks burning from the cold, you slip back under the hides that are still warm from your family's breath. The contrast is intoxicating, the icy sting fading into an enveloping heat, and the exhaustion settling into your bones as sleep reclaims you. The night has not been wasted. It has been shared between wakefulness and rest, between duty and dream. So these moonlit wanderings became a part of the nightly rhythm binding survival to the silver glow of the stars. Sleep was never a wall against the night, but a dance with it, punctuated by footsteps on the snow and the quiet satisfaction of returning home again. The hunters return from their moonlit errands, their furs heavy with frost, their arms burdened with small game. As the lodge stirs, you notice another rhythm that sustains winter life: exchange. It was not enough to hunt or to trap alone. Survival depended on trade, on the movement of goods between families and between distant groups, even in the deepest cold. Networks of connection pulsed just beneath the snow, ensuring that warmth and food could be shared. Archaeological finds confirm that winter trade routes existed long before any European contact. Shells from coastal regions have appeared hundreds of miles inland. Obsidian from volcanic ranges has turned up far across the plains. These items didn't travel by accident. They were carried deliberately, piece by piece, through the harsh landscapes. The winter slowed, but it did not stop this movement. The camps might huddle against the cold, but the exchanges still flickered, like a fire being passed from one hearth to another. You might be surprised to learn that furs, especially the thick winter pelts, were among the most sought-after goods. Buffalo hides, beaver pelts, and fox furs served as both insulation and currency, traded for foods or tools that a family lacked. Imagine stepping into a neighboring lodge to offer a surplus hide, and returning with dried berries or a polished antler awl. Each transaction was more than just practical. It wove bonds of obligation and friendship. Researchers remain divided on how formal these exchanges actually were. Some argue that they followed strict protocols, with rituals of gift-giving and reciprocity marking each trade. Others suggest that they were more casual, flexible, and based on the need of the moment. The truth may have varied with the tribe, the season, and the circumstances. What matters is that even during the bitter winters, the communities refused to be isolated. They reached outward, ensuring that survival was something that was shared. The sensory details bring this all to life. Picture hands passing goods across a fire's glow, rough fur brushing against a smooth shell, the cold weight of a stone tool traded for the warmth of dried meat. Voices murmur their thanks, and laughter breaks out at a child's interruption. And the air smells of a stew that is simmering as the negotiations stretch late into the night. These exchanges were not held in marketplaces, but in homes, intimate and communal. Oddly enough, some oral traditions mentioned playful competitions during winter gatherings, where families would display their best goods to impress their visitors. A father might boast about the thickness of his fox pelt, while a neighbor would tease him with a rarer shell. These moments of humor broke the monotony of the hardship, reminding everyone that winter was not only to be endured, but also enlivened by connection. Imagine lying beneath your furs afterward, knowing that the berries in your belly or the tool by your side came not from your own work alone, but from the hands of your allies. The warmth that you feel is doubled, the fire's heat and the reassurance that others are watching over you, even beyond your own lodge. Ethnographers point out that trade also carried intangible gifts. Songs, stories, and rituals traveled along with the goods, spreading culture as surely as the shells or the hides did. A visitor might teach a new lullaby, which the parents would then sing to their children as they drifted off to sleep. In this way, the winter nights became not only about preserving bodies, but about enriching minds. Now, imagine yourself at such a gathering. A guest enters, the snow sliding from their shoulders. You share a bowl of hot broth, you listen to their tale of a distant river, and you receive in return a necklace of bone beads that will dangle near your child's cradle. When the night deepens, you curl up under the hides, hearing the faint clink of those beads as your child shifts, and you feel the web of trade that is binding you to countless others all across the frozen land. So the winter trade was more than just survival economics. It was an affirmation that even in the harshest season, humans sought out connection. The exchange of goods carried with it the exchange of trust, and when sleep finally came, it was softened by the knowledge that you did not face the cold alone, but as part of a network that stretched far beyond your own lodge walls. The night lengthens, but within the lodges there is still some energy. After the trade and the food, after the songs and the stories, the families often turn to games, small diversions that brighten the gloom of the endless snow. You can imagine the dice rattling in a wooden bowl, the quiet thrill of guessing the outcomes, and the laughter rising softly, even as the icy wind gnawed at the world outside. Games may seem trivial in a season of survival, but here they served as a warmth of another kind, a warmth of the spirit. Historical records show that the games were not merely for children. The adults played too, often with stakes involved, with shells, beads, or small goods changing hands. Dice games were particularly popular. They were crafted from plumb stones, bone, or carved wood, painted with simple designs, and they clattered together with a satisfying sound, rolling fate across the mats of hide. Picture the soft glow of the firelight reflecting off the dice, the shadows stretching as eager hands reached forward to collect their winnings. You might be surprised to learn that the gambling sometimes continued deep into the night, even when resources were scarce. One family might risk their finest pelt, while another would offer up strings of beads. The losses could sting, but the excitement brought a relief from the monotony, and the act of playing kept their minds sharp. For a moment, survival gave way to suspense, laughter, and rivalry. Scholars continue to debate whether the Winter Games were primarily for entertainment, or whether they carried a ceremonial weight. Some argue that the dice games symbolize the randomness of fate, connecting the players to the cycles of chance and destiny. Others suggest that they were practical, teaching children counting skills and patience. Both views likely hold some truth, intertwining utility and joy. The sensory details of these evenings are incredibly lively. The dice click against the bowl, roll across the mats, and then come to rest with a faint thud. Voices rise and fall in anticipation, then explode in a cheer or groan in disappointment. The air is thick with smoke, but the laughter cuts through it like clear bells. The dogs shift restlessly, puzzled by the sudden bursts of noise. Oddly enough, not all of the games required tools. Some were wordplay contests where one person would start a story and the others would try to add clever twists. Children played guessing games, trying to identify objects by touch from beneath a blanket. Even the snow itself became a toy, rolled into balls or carved into shapes before the night closed in. These diversions may have been small, but they made the long winters bearable. Imagine lying under your hide blanket, half asleep, as the sound of the dice rolling and the laughter drifts over you. Your body is heavy with warmth, but your mind just floats, soothed by the rhythm of the play. The game is both a background noise and a lullaby, reminding you that life continues on even in the harshest of months. Ethnographers note that these games often ended not with a declared winner, but with a shared meal or a new story, ensuring that no one carried any bitterness into their sleep. The act of playing was more important than the outcome. The community mattered more than the victory. And so, as the families drifted into slumber, the echoes of the games lingered on. Children dreamed of lucky rolls and clever guesses, and adults of fortunes that were won or lost. The camp itself felt lighter, its burdens eased by the laughter. In that sense, the games were as vital as the hides or the fires. They reminded the people that winter was not only to be endured, but also enlivened, that survival could include joy. So when you close your eyes now, imagine the dice clattering softly in the background, the laughter rising in bursts, and the warmth radiating not just from the fire, but from a shared amusement. It is a reminder that even in a frozen world, play was never abandoned. It was a thread that was woven into survival, carrying spirits into their dreams, steadier and lighter than they might have otherwise been. The laughter from the games quiets down, replaced by a slower, deeper rhythm. The families begin to settle fully beneath their hides, and the room fills with voices, not of play, but of story. You can almost hear the hush as it spreads as an elder clears their throat. The children snuggle in closer, and the fire glows steady in anticipation. The tailies are about to begin, tailies that are layered thicker than the furs that cover the sleepers, stories that insulate their hearts as much as the hides insulate their bodies. It's well documented that storytelling was central to winter life across countless native communities. The long nights offered hours that could not be spent hunting or traveling, so they were given to words instead. The elders passed down histories, myths, and lessons, ensuring that each new generation inherited the knowledge as naturally as they inherited the warmth. For many, the spoken word was as vital to survival as food or fire. One curious tradition was the belief in some nations that certain sacred stories could only be told in the winter. Coyotes, tricksters, and creation beings made their appearances when the world was frozen, and the snakes or insects were sleeping beneath the earth. To tell these stories in the summer was taboo, believed to upset the balance of nature. Imagine that. The winter not only shaping their bodies, but also shaping when memory itself could be spoken. Researchers still disagree about the primary purpose of these tailies. Some emphasize their role as a moral instruction, with children learning humility, courage, or respect through the narrative. Others argue that the stories were a kind of communal dreaming, weaving entertainment and imagination into the long nights. It's likely that both were true, And that duality is what gave storytelling its power. The sensory atmosphere of such nights is thick with presence. The fire crackles steadily, throwing shadows that exaggerate every gesture of the speaker's hands. The hides rustle as the children shift closer, their eyes wide. The air smells of smoke, herbs, and the stew that is lingering from earlier. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, the only sound that matters is the cadence of the storyteller's voice, low, rising, falling, and pausing for effect. Oddly enough, some accounts describe the storytellers deliberately lowering their voices as the tale deepened, forcing the listeners to lean in. This technique made even the sleepiest child rouse themselves, eager not to miss a single word. Picture the whole lodge bending forward, their breaths held, waiting for the trickster's next mischief or the hero's next challenge. Imagine yourself under the firs, half asleep, hearing a tale of how the stars came to be. Perhaps they were sparks from an ancient fire that scattered into the sky. The rhythm of the story seeps into your body, soothing you with its familiarity. Even as your mind wanders through its images, each word is a thread, stitching the present to the past, the living to the ancestors. Anthropologists note how storytelling built cohesion. Everyone in the lodge shared the same tale, the same laughter, the same gasp of surprise. In a season when survival demanded unity, the stories reminded the families that they were bound together not just by necessity, but also by imagination. They could see themselves in the trickster, the hunter, the star. And so, as the night deepens, you can feel the weight of both the hides and the words pressing gently over you. The stories pile on top of each other like layers of fur, each one holding a warmth of a different kind. By the time the last tale ends, the lodge is hushed, but the images still linger. Coyotes dancing in the snow, spirits walking through the firelight, stars scattered like embers. So sleep comes wrapped not only in furs, but in memory and myth. And when you drift into your dreams, it is hard to tell where the story ends and your own vision begins. The line blurs, but that is the point. The stories were not just entertainment. They were blankets of the mind, wrapping the families as securely as any buffalo hide. The stories fade into silence, yet not all words are meant to pass so lightly. Some nights are reserved for ceremony, when the lodge transforms from a place of shelter into a sacred space. You can picture it, the fire stirred brighter, herbs tossed into the flames, and faces painted with shadows as songs rise that are not casual lullabies, but prayers that are meant to echo beyond the smoke hole. These are the sacred ritual nights, where warmth and belief are braided tightly together. Accounts from tribal elders and early observers remind us that winter was a season of ceremony. The long nights were not wasted. They were seen as times when the spirit world came closer, when the veil between the human and the divine grew thin. Certain dances, chants, or offerings were performed specifically in the heart of winter, when survival itself felt the most precarious. To honor the spirits during this time was to ask for protection, guidance, and renewal. You might be surprised to learn that some rituals were explicitly linked to sleep and dreams. A family might sing prayers over their children before they bedded down, asking that their dreams would carry messages from their ancestors. Feathers, stones, or charms were placed near the sleepers' heads, not as decoration, but as guardians in the unseen world. Imagine lying under the firs, feeling the warmth of your family, while also believing that invisible protectors were hovering nearby, keeping the nightmares at bay. Scholars remain divided about how formal these winter ceremonies actually were. Some suggest that they followed structured patterns that were overseen by leaders or shamans, with precise songs and gestures repeated year after year. Others argue that they could be more spontaneous, prayers rising up in the moment when the storms howled or when illness threatened. The lack of consensus hints at a great diversity, with rituals shaped by each community's needs and each winter's trials. The sensory world of these nights is unforgettable. The drums might beat softly, their low thump blending with the crackle of the fire. The voices would chant in unison, weaving a soundscape that feels larger than the lodge itself. The air would grow thick with the fragrance of burning cedar or sweetgrass, the smoke spiraling upward as if it were carrying their words skyward. The shadows would leap wildly on the walls, turning the ordinary hides into moving canvases of spirit. Oddly enough, some ceremonies were timed to celestial events. When the moon was full and the snow gleamed brighter, the families would gather to honor its power. The stories said that the moon guided the hunters, watched over the children, and listened to the prayers that were whispered before sleep. Imagine drifting into slumber beneath its pale glow, convinced that its silver light followed you even through your dreams. The participation was collective. The children might not understand every chant, but they felt the weight of the moment, the hush, the rhythm, the certainty that something larger was unfolding. The adults carried that weight with intention, adding their voices, their breath, and their presence. Even the act of staying awake together before surrendering to sleep became sacred, as though the night itself demanded reverence before it would allow for rest. Researchers often point out that rituals gave a structure to the uncertainty, in the chaos of the storms, the hunger, and the fear. The ceremonies reminded the people that they were not powerless. They had words to speak, fires to light, and rhythms to follow. The rituals transformed the cold night into something that was ordered, meaningful, and survivable. Now picture yourself lying back beneath the hides after such a night. The chant still hums in your ears, even though the lodge has fallen quiet. The smell of cedar clings to your hair and the drumbeat echoes in your chest. Sleep comes slowly, but when it does, it feels heavy, safe, and wrapped not only in warmth, but in the certainty of belonging to a world that is alive with unseen guardians. So these sacred ritual nights were not interruptions to winter survival. They were its very heart. They bound the community together, they reassured the fearful, and they reminded every sleeper that the world was larger than just snow and storms. To close your eyes after such a night was to rest in the knowledge that you were protected not only by fire and furs, but by spirit itself. The ritual night leaves behind a profound stillness, yet winter has its way of testing the body as well as the spirit. You stir beneath the hides, and you feel the chill biting at your toes, creeping in no matter how tightly you wrap yourself. Illness is the unspoken guest of every camp, slipping through the cracks like icy drafts. Coughs echo faintly in the lodge, bodies huddle closer, and everyone knows that the cold and sickness are twin threats. Historical accounts show that native families met these dangers with a great resourcefulness. Medicinal teas brewed from willow bark, cedar, or spruce needles were sipped beside the fire. Steam that was inhaled from boiling herbs eased lungs that were heavy with smoke or frost. Animal fats that were rubbed on the skin sealed in warmth and soothed aches. Sleep was not always peaceful, but the healing itself often began in those hours of rest, wrapped in medicine, both physical and spiritual. You might be surprised to learn that some believed that dreams played a role in recovery. A vision during sleep could reveal which plant to use, or whether the sickness was purely physical or if it was tied to an imbalance in the spirit. Shamans or healers would interpret these dreams, guiding the family toward the right remedies. Imagine lying feverish beneath the buffalo hides, drifting in and out of visions while your relatives watched anxiously for signs of both change and meaning. Researchers still argue about how widespread these practices actually were. Some emphasize the empirical knowledge of the herbs, the vitamin-rich pine needles that prevented scurvy, or the willow bark that acted as a natural pain reliever. Others highlight the ceremonial side, where chants and prayers accompanied every single treatment. The debate persists, but perhaps no strict line ever existed. Medicine and spirit were braided together, as inseparable as fur and hide. The sensory details are truly striking. The bitter taste of the bark tea lingers on your tongue, sharp yet strangely comforting. The steam curls from the pot, fogging the cold air. The patient breathes shallowly, wrapped in layer after layer, the fur damp with their sweat. A hand strokes their forehead, cool and steady, while the fire pops rhythmically. Around them, the rest of the family drifts into an uneasy sleep, their ears tuned for any changes in breathing. Oddly enough, some oral traditions mention children being taught to chew on spruce tips in the early spring to strengthen their lungs for the winters that were ahead. The practice was preventive, a way of preparing their bodies long before any illness could strike. Survival wasn't only about reaction, it was also about foresight, stretching from one season to the next. Imagine now, lying ill but not alone. Your kin are resting nearby, their warmth encircling you like a protective wall. The healer mutters prayers, tosses cedar onto the fire, and the fragrant smoke swirls above you. The night feels heavy, yet also protective. Even in sickness, you are wrapped in the community. Sleep comes fitfully, but each dose feels like progress, and each dream feels like guidance. Ethnographers often note how sickness can sharpen solidarity. A family might sacrifice their own rest, tending to a sick member all through the night. They believed that healing was a collective effort, that no one endured an illness in isolation. This constant attention ensured not only the survival of the sick, but the resilience of the group itself. So when you imagine closing your eyes after sipping a bitter tea, you realize that even in illness, winter sleep was layered with hope. The remedies came not only from the plants, but from touch, from prayer, and from the steadfast warmth of others. Illness was a visitor that could not always be banished, but through a shared care it could be endured. And in that endurance, even a restless, fevered sleep carried the promise of the morning. The harshest storms, the sickness, the hunger, these are heavy things to endure. And yet, when you shift in your bedding, you notice something softer. It's the steady rise and fall of the bodies that are all around you. Winter sleep was never solitary. It was communal, layered with a warmth that no single fur or fire could ever match. You lie shoulder to shoulder with your kin, the heat of one body blending into the next until the cold outside feels distant, muffled by the cocoon of your togetherness. Anthropologists have long noted the importance of shared sleeping arrangements in the native camps. Families would gather close, not just for comfort, but for survival. Body heat was a resource that was as vital as firewood, and no warmth was ever wasted. Infants would nestle between their parents, elders would be tucked near the center, and older children would sprawl across the edges, every position chosen with care. To sleep was to weave yourself into a living quilt. You might be surprised to learn that even the dogs were invited into this circle. Their thick coats radiated heat, and their loyalty added another layer of security. Oral traditions describe children curling up against the dogs as though they were additional siblings, both a protector and a pillow. Imagine the coarse fur tickling your cheek, the dog's steady breathing syncing with your own as sleep pulled you under. Scholars still debate how these arrangements shifted across the different tribes and regions. Some argue that the lodges maintained strict divisions by gender or age, even in their sleep. Others point to more flexible arrangements where survival simply trumped any structure. The diversity leaves a wide picture, but the common thread is clear. The cold was never faced alone. The sensory richness of this communal bed is overwhelming. You can feel the press of shoulders, the brush of hair against your skin. The hides grow heavy as more bodies tug them tighter. The air is warm but thick, filled with the mingled scents of smoke, sweat, and fur. When someone shifts, the whole bundle moves with them. When someone sighs, the sound ripples through the group like a gentle wave. Oddly enough, some visitors noted that this closeness led to a kind of synchronized slumber. The breathing of one person would set the rhythm, the others would follow, and soon the entire lodge would rise and fall together, a single organism at rest. Picture that, dozens of lungs moving in perfect harmony, as though the family itself were one body, dreaming a collective dream. Imagine yourself there now, pressed into the warmth of your kin. Your toes brush against someone's legs and your back rests against a cousin's chest. The fire's glow flickers, but it no longer matters. The warmth here is human, immediate, and unyielding. You cannot turn without waking someone up, but you don't mind. Safety outweighs space, and comfort outweighs privacy. Ethnographers suggest that this communal rest had psychological benefits, too. Children grew up knowing their family's presence not only in the daylight, but in every single breath of the night. The elders found reassurance in the contact of their younger kin. Even in their dreams, people carried the sense of belonging, a memory of warmth that lingered long after they had woken up. So when you think of the winter nights in these camps, do not picture solitary sleepers. Picture clusters of warmth, bodies layered like furs, breaths mingling, and hearts beating steady. The cold world outside was vast and merciless, but inside the families became each other's blankets. And in that unity, sleep was possible. Communal rest was more than just a strategy. It was a philosophy, an understanding that survival itself was shared. No one endured it alone. And as the night deepened, that lesson was pressed into every rib and every heartbeat, binding the people together in a warmth that no winter could ever steal. The lodge has grown so quiet now that even the fire seems reluctant to crackle. Only the faint glow of the embers pulses, casting a red heartbeat across the walls. Outside, the snow lies deep, the world wrapped in a profound silence. Inside, every body is stilled, every breath has softened. You can feel the weight of the hides pressing down, the closeness of your kin beside you, the faint musk of fur and smoke clinging to the air. It is the deepest hour of the night, when exhaustion folds everyone into the gentlest of surrenders. Archaeological evidence and oral testimony alike remind us that these winter camps endured not by accident, but by the relentless practice of resilience. Each detail that you have followed, the hides, the snow walls, the lamps, the herbs, the cradle boards, the songs, was part of a system that was honed across centuries. None of it was excess. Every single choice had a purpose, and every ritual carried a weight. To sleep here was to rest inside a collective memory of ingenuity. One lesser-known detail is how the morning itself was treated with reverence after such nights. Some traditions speak of a brief silence at dawn, a pause before the daily bustle began, to acknowledge that the family had survived another long darkness. Imagine waking with frost on your eyelashes, stirring beside your kin, and realizing that against every single odd, the lodge still stood, the fire still smoldered, and your body was still warm. Scholars continue to puzzle over how much of this survival was born from necessity alone, and how much of it was framed as a philosophy. Was the winter endured merely as an obstacle, or was it embraced as a teacher, shaping patience, discipline, and humility? The evidence suggests that both are true, that the hardship honed their bodies, but it also honed their minds, teaching them that the cold itself was a part of life's balance. The sensory quiet of this final moment is delicate. You can hear the occasional sigh as someone shifts, the whisper of the snow settling outside, the faint pop of a coal giving way. The air tastes faintly of ash, but not unpleasantly so. It is the taste of continuity, of breath inside walls that have seen countless nights just like this one. Your muscles are heavy, your thoughts are blurred. Sleep is no longer something that you seek, but something that claims you gently, like a tide carrying driftwood out to sea. Oddly enough, some oral histories speak of dreams at the winter's end, where people would envision the first shoots of spring long before they ever appeared. These dreams were taken as promises, signs that the long night would not last forever. To dream of green in the white world was to believe in tomorrow, and that belief was itself a form of survival. So now, as you close your eyes in this imagined lodge, you are wrapped in every single layer that history has offered. The buffalo hides, the cedar smoke, the songs of the elders, the closeness of your kin, the watchfulness of the firekeepers, and the silence of the snow itself. All of it cradles you, not as fragments, but as a whole, a winter world that has been transformed into a sanctuary of sleep. And in that sanctuary, you understand the truth. Native Americans did not simply endure the cold. They turned the very heart of winter into a place where warmth, memory, and meaning all intertwined. Sleep was not just rest. It was resilience, ceremony, and belonging. It was the quiet triumph of life, carried through the longest night. And now, as we leave the lodge behind, let your own breath begin to slow. Imagine the fire has been reduced to a bed of glowing coals, a faint warmth still lingering in the air. Outside, the storm has passed, leaving the world blanketed in a white silence. Inside, the people are resting in unison, their dreams woven together like the threads in a great quilt. Allow yourself to feel that same stillness. Picture the softness of the furs against your skin, the gentle hush of the snow pressing against the walls, the steady rhythm of a shared breathing. These details, simple yet profound, Remind you that warmth can be found even in the coldest of places, and that sleep comes easiest when trust surrounds you. The lessons of those winter nights drift toward you now like falling snow. They whisper of patience, of community, of resilience in the face of harshness. They remind you that survival is not only about strength, but also about softness, about sharing warmth, telling stories, tending fires, and dreaming together. Even in the darkest of hours, comfort is always possible. Let those whispers guide you now. Let them soften your own edges. Each inhale carries warmth with it, and each exhale releases weight. There is no need to hold yourself tightly anymore. The night will keep itself. The fire will endure without your watch. Slowly, gently, let the images of the snow and the fire fade away into your own darkness. Feel yourself being carried into a cocoon of safety, as if the hides have been tucked tighter around your shoulders. The cold is far away now, unable to reach you. Only the warmth remains, steady and calm. So drift as the camp drifts into rest. Let the night hold you as it held them, carrying you toward the morning with a quiet strength. Sleep well, dream gently. You are safe.